we'll be able to work out. Can I thank everybody, first of all, for their attendance at this meeting just before the recess. So it's good to see everybody here. Have we any apologies, Andrew?
Yeah, Councillor Graham's an apology, but also Katrina Hassel has asked me to submit her apologies.
All right. Is somebody going to do the presentation instead of Katrina?
Yeah, there's other officers here able to do that.
All right, that's good. Thank you. Just two points to mention. With the approval of the panel, we'll bring item 12 and take it after item 2. That will allow Alison Gordon to leave the meeting rather than have her sit through the length of the Audit and Scrutiny panel meeting today, if everyone's agreeable to that. And Derek, once he's done his presentation, Derek will leave as well. Obviously, both are very busy, so we're grateful that they're actually here today. So we go on to the agenda then. Item 1 on the agenda is declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? No, are we okay? That's fine. So we go on to item 2. Which is the Audit Scotland report. So if I could ask Ken, if he could go over that with us. Thanks, Ken.
Yeah, thanks, convener. The purpose of this report is obviously to inform members of the panel of the Audit Scotland report, Improving Outcomes for Young People Through School Education, that was published back in March, to provide an overview of the issues raised by Audit Scotland and the recommendations of relevance to councils. And allow the panel to see how these issues and recommendations are being addressed by management. I mean, the key headline in the report is that really the Audit Scotland noted that the poverty-related attainment gap remains wide and that inequalities have been exacerbated by the COVID pandemic. The report concluded that progress in closing the gap has been limited and falls well short of Scottish Government aims. The report highlights that improvements need to happen more quickly and there needs to be greater consistency across the country. I think the report recognises the role, the different role and responsibilities that both the Scottish Government, local authorities and Education Scotland have. And throughout the report, there's a kind of thread around the need for all those organisations to work more closely together to take forward the recommendations. So the report itself, the Audit Scotland report's key findings are laid out in section 2. I wasn't going to go through those line by line, but you'll see there that the report comments on wide variations across councils, with evidence of some areas of improvement and other areas of worsening performance. As I say, the poverty-related attainment gap remains wide and inequalities have been exacerbated. At section 2.3 onwards, we've summarised there the Audit Scotland recommendations, and you'll see that those are partly addressed at the Scottish Government, partly addressed at Education Scotland, partly addressed at local authorities, and then there's some recommendations for all partners working together. The management commentary that's been provided at section 3 provides quite a full response, I think, to the issues raised by the report and outlines how the service is addressing some of those issues. And Derek's on the call today, so I would now pass over to Derek, really just to kind of talk through how the service are taking forward this agenda and responding to the issues raised by Audit Scotland.
Thank you very much, Ken. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much, Councillor Watson, for the invitation to attend this morning. So just a couple of observations in support of and continuing on from what Ken has already offered. Obviously, the management commentary was a more detailed bit of work that was going on anyway that we've decided to capture here. I should say that this paper is also gone to Education and Families in May, and so substantially there has been scrutiny through the committee for some of these things already. But in this management commentary, what we sought to capture were some of the responses that we were planning as a service, as a local authority, to respond to some of the things which are coming out of the Audit Scotland report, especially around that emerging from COVID, how things may have worsened or deepened in terms of the poverty-related attainment gap, or that broad concern of Audit Scotland. So obviously helping kids to catch up and having a number of things that we'll be able to do there is crucial. clearly we've learned a lot about the digital and blended learning approaches, and we've had some big successes there, so there's real things to build on. Obviously, we are interested in how we get a fix on where young people are in their learning through some of the tools we have in the box around what we call ACEL, or the levels of achievement as determined by teachers in primary and the early stages of secondary and the broad general education. And then also, and I think fundamentally, I think this is probably quite unique in Scotland. We've just completed a survey with all secondary and primary schools. Probably have data for about 42,000 children in the survey so far. It's about 86% of the pupil population. Quite an incredible effort has gone into it, and we will determine from that where the children are in terms of well-being, and that will become a springboard for future partnership and council actions. And then obviously in the next steps section, we're saying we've established a number of interventions in the last few years. We think that the solution in terms of the recovery piece is to strengthen those interventions and work through them rather than add new things onto the table. And then obviously within the management action section in Appendix 1, there were 4 things specifically that Audit Scotland suggested local authorities should look at. And we think we've got things in hand there that are pretty robust. Certainly the using data. We've built a dashboard for all schools, call it What's the Story, and it tells that attainment story for all schools, including the poverty-related attainment gap. The using evidence-based approaches, you'll see there's a narrative around what we have been doing in that space through things like our improvement hub and things like learning from research and our own interventions that we've incubated through the SAC programme, etc. And then in terms of sharing learning, obviously there's a wider piece of it there in terms of family groups as well, and in terms of how we get the schools learning with each other, from each other. Some of those family groups are involved with other authorities in the West Partnership, which is also a very positive development for us. And in terms of quality improvement, this year, this last session, where it was COVID affected, was pretty much about response and recovery, and the quality improvement was bespoke to that. This year, it will be very much about using the springboard of the Health and Wellbeing Survey and the data we can gather about where children are, including what came out of the recent SQA alternative certification model, and using that as a real springboard for improvement going forward. So we're very positive about it. The only last observation I would make is the report and the management commentary, or the management response sections of this report. We do highlight the fact there was a parallel report done by Education Scotland on closing the poverty-related attainment gap, which told a different type of story. So Audit Scotland's view is, and this is where it becomes a bit complicated, I think, Audit Scotland's view was that for the period in which this report pertains, which is up to 2019, from 2014, that in that time, the poverty-related attainment gap in Scotland did close, but perhaps not as much as maybe had been hoped. The Education Scotland report's much more positive, so I think people can draw their own conclusions, and I'll probably leave it there if that's okay, Chair. Happy, along with Ken, to take questions.
Right, thanks very much, Derek. Ken, do you want to come in again, or we just take questions now? Okay, Bob, you've got a question.
Thanks, convener. Derek, it's a question for Derek. I know that this has been looking at what has been in the past as we go forward. But my questions, Derek, is that all the members will have, over the past few weeks, had received information about many schools where the kids or the teachers have been affected with COVID and are having to isolate. And we know as members, with the information we get, the numbers increasing. It can vary, obviously, Derek, it can vary. What impact do you think that will have as we move forward, given just we're linking in with this report? I know I'm asking a question about moving it forward. Can you give us any advice on that, please? Thank you, convener.
That's the meeting now, and they're not talking about the report just now.
Yeah, I'm happy to respond, Councillor Watson. So
A coffee,
I think there might be someone who needs to mute, possibly. I'll just continue.
Councillor Johnson, you may have to mute. We hear what you're saying.
I've done that. So
Sorry, I wasn't aware of who it was, but thank you. Right, so to answer the question, Councillor Burrows, I would say it's been from the point of view of the young people, and there's reference in this report to the stakeholder groups we've built during the pandemic to stay in touch with people. So on about 20 occasions, I have met with ASN Parent Council chairs or mainstream Parent Council chairs, and I've also on about 10 occasions met with a pupil forum of young people. From the point of view of the young people in those meetings, the self-isolation has been significantly disruptive. So I think we have to just accept that that's a perception of the young people. 10,000 occasions last year, in fact it's more than that now, it's probably about 11,000. On 11,000 occasions, let's say, a child has had to self-isolate for a period of 10 to 14 days in North Lanarkshire. And about 900 occasions where a member of the staff has had to do so. Sometimes people have had to do that on 2 or 3 occasions. Therefore, that has been a significant disruption. And we are not sure at this moment, because there's quite a lot of political narrative from the UK government, Scottish government, around about how we might handle things come August. It's not entirely clear to me at which point the requirement to self-isolate would no longer be in play. Okay, so it's whether or not there might be something more proportionate going forward, Councillor Burrows, where maybe if you've had two jabs or you have a vaccine, you may not be required to self-isolate, you know, if you were a close contact of somebody. That type of thing could come into play. But at this point, we don't know. In terms of the system last year, I would argue that it has been significantly affected. And I think going forward, in terms of future national and local audit reports, I think that anything we say about attainment needs to be balanced by the disruption we've gone through. Going forward, I think it's really, really important that we do revert to our core purpose of generating educational success and being really positive about what the young people can achieve. Preliminary suggestions coming from a wellbeing survey is that the young people are, generally speaking, in a good place and relatively robust. So therefore that gives us a good springboard for going forward. But we also are able, through the Health and Wellbeing Survey, to identify things that we need to address. So Councillor Burrows, I do think it's been disruptive. I'm not sure how it's going to play out next year. And it's one of the factors we're going to have to play into future reports we bring through committee about things such as educational attainment and closing the gap.
Bob, do you want to come in again? Are you okay
No.
with that?
Convener, I'm okay with that. Thank you, Derek.
Right, thanks. Jim, Councillor Hume?
Thanks. I've got quite a lot of questions in this report. I'll keep them brief, and maybe if the answers could be brief. It's really lots of questions on this item, but not so many on others. So don't think there's a large number of questions on everything. The first thing is that this is such a comprehensive report that it almost requires a meeting on its own to go over in the right level of detail. And I noticed Derek said something about education and families. Has it been there, or is it going there? What's happened with that, Derek? Could you explain that first, just briefly? Has it been there and they know about it, or?
Yes.
Right. Okay, that's fine. Wee bit surprised at that. That's okay. On page 7, the first line, there's a wide variation in performance across councils. Is there a benchmarking table being developed that shows where various councils are in the performance tables, Derek?
Yeah, it's in the actual report, the Audit Scotland report, which is obviously referred to.
Right, okay.
But
Yeah.
to reassure you, Councillor Human, just to give you a bit of data, if you were to look at the 8 challenge authorities, bear in mind the reporting period is 2014 to 2019.
Yeah.
And as of 2019, you would find, and obviously I wasn't in North Lanarkshire until the very latter stages of that reporting period, the last 6 months of that reporting period. So I'm talking about things that predate my time in North Lanarkshire. But notwithstanding that, Councillor Hume, I would say that you'd probably find of the 8 challenge authorities, North Lanarkshire is probably in the top half for all of the measures which are mentioned, maybe with the exception of one but broadly speaking, we're in the top third, top half of the 8 challenge authorities, so probably would stand fair comparison.
Okay. I'll just keep going with the questions, Sandy.
That's fine.
I've got a supplementary on that one. If the figures relate to, in the Audit Scotland report, relate to 19, I presume North Lanarkshire has been keeping the tables updated with the performance measures that they've set up. Is that right? With the 8 authorities, are you comparing where you stand against each other on an ongoing basis, Derek?
We haven't typically tended to report on us versus the other challenge authorities. We've tended to look at ourselves benchmarked against Scotland, and we've tended to use a range of indicators. And what's interesting is that Audit Scotland, and Ken can confirm this, tend to use the LGBF indicators, tend to use quite traditional indicators. So it's the 1A levels 4, 5, 6, etc., and tend to focus on qualifications, not awards. The Insight national mechanism developed by Scottish Government has a wider set of classifications and includes weightings for poverty, which are not seen in the Audit Scotland report. But what Audit Scotland have done is, strictly in terms of where Scotland was between 2014 and 2019, did it improve? And it has seen some improvement, but it also demonstrates that a gap continues to exist by that point. We haven't tracked ourselves against the other challenge authorities, but we have done it against Scotland, and we've used a wide range of indicators to do so. And there's a huge amount of information on that has gone through in terms of performance through Education and Families Committee. Councillor Hume.
Okay, thanks. I guess some of my colleagues might want to see the updated table, Derek, and with the comparison in Scotland. I'll ask them about that. It mentions PEF in one of the items, which was originally allocated to head teachers to support staff they thought, pupils they thought needed it. Does the PEF funding still, is it still allocated by head teachers, or has the council started to utilise that in light of the current restrictions?
The governance around PEF is it's very much directly funding into schools, and various reports were brought through Education and Families do show how the schools use their PEF funding, but it's controlled by head teachers and for that purpose. And I think it's important that I say that in this forum.
Okay.
Ken, do you want us to come in at that point?
Yeah, really just to give Councillor Hume some additional comfort there. We're currently concluding work looking at the services use of SAC and PEF funding. Looking at, and one of the things we'll be looking at is that we continue to use that in a manner that's consistent, obviously, with the expectations placed upon us by the Scottish Government when they fund us. So my current expectation is that report will be available to the panel for the next audit meeting.
That's good, Ken. Thanks for that. Page item 2.1. The last sentence in the bullet point at the bottom of the page. Better data is needed to understand if other outcomes like well-being and confidence are improving. Is that data available? You decided what that is and you're working on it just now, Derek, or do you still need to prepare that data to do the analysis?
Councillor Hume, this is Audit Scotland's broad findings about Scotland. Audit Scotland's view is that better data is needed across the country to understand and contextualise outcomes. I think what I drew, and it's only a personal view of the report, but what I drew of and Ken may take a slightly different view, but I don't think he will. Audit Scotland probably we're saying it's quite a complex landscape now in terms of information, and there's an awful lot of data out there. OECD made a similar point about Scotland recently in their report, and I think what Scotland needs to do is decide what it wants to improve. One of the things Scottish Government has sought to do is to implement through legislation a wellbeing survey for children to come forward from next year. In advance of that legislation, and much more broadly than that legislation would demand us to do, we instituted a population-wide wellbeing survey this year, and we have that data in that survey for 42,000 children, which will be unique in Scotland. Scottish Government officials are very interested in the data we've gathered, and we will, through committee, be able to share the broad outline of that. And I was talking to some of our officers this morning about the initial data and what it looks like. But broadly speaking, I think it will provide reassurance for members locally and indeed beyond North Lanarkshire that the children, broadly speaking, as a population, many of them have emerged in a robust fashion from the pandemic so far, but it's also helping us to identify future improvement priorities, Councillor Hume. We will use that as a baseline. So in effect, what I am saying is the actions we brought forward, we were going to be doing these things anyway, but they are actually a response to what Audit Scotland is seeking for the government to do, but we're in advance of that.
Thanks. It sounds like you've made reasonable responses to the 19 the Audit Scotland figures and report up to 19. So following up on that is good. I've still got some other questions. Sandy, I'm trying not to turn this into a conversation, but
no, it's okay, Jim. If you've got questions, just go ahead. Yeah, you're all right.
Okay, thanks. Page 8, 2.5, 2.6 mentioned the RIC, Derek. Is that the same thing as what you call the challenge authorities? And the question I have is, are you working with the RIC group, the 8 authorities in that, to achieve objectives or to analyse current positions, or is North Lanarkshire, like you said with your survey, is it operating on its own for this and feeding back to these groups?
So the RIC is a Regional Improvement Collaborative, and the Regional Improvement Collaborative involves the 8 West Partnership authorities, some of which are challenge authorities, but not all.
Right, okay.
So we do gather data through the West Partnership, and we report on that type of thing through, we actually bring that through Education and Families as well, but there's a Glasgow City Region Education Committee, and there's reporting there, and there's representation through Councillor McNally on that committee as our convener, as is true for all 8 of the West Partnership authorities. So the answer is really that we work through it. There are things that we do as a local authority because we have a statutory duty to improve the standards in our schools as an Education and Families Committee. That's our statutory duty. But through the empowerment agenda, regional improvement collaboratives were set up to strengthen the middle layer of Scottish education in response to the previous OECD report and to improve collaboration and improve networks. And we've got increasing profile in the West Partnership as the West Partnership piece of work evolves. And we're excited by how that can add some value into North Lanarkshire, but what it shouldn't do is weaken our statutory responsibility to improve things on our own terms.
Okay, thanks. 3.12, the SNSA, Derek. How do the SNA results compare with the teacher assessments for the individual pupils?
Well, to be truthful, we didn't gather them in the last year of the pandemic, so we're just starting to kind of look again at SNSA, and I don't actually have the data picture at the moment. That'll be being collated, probably with a view to reporting to a future education committee. That's one of the things in terms of building a 360 picture of where the young people are. The health and wellbeing survey is an important component. The teacher judgments is probably more important. The ASO data and the SNSA is there because it's designed as a diagnostic tool. It's not necessarily designed as a whole system quality assurance tool. So we need to bear in mind that teachers will use that flexibly and differently, and that's the agreement done with trade unions. So it's quite difficult for me to say at population level about SNSA that it can give us the kind of picture you're suggesting we might get from that, Councillor Hume. We're more likely to get that picture from the ASIL data, but we do use SNSA to inform those teacher judgments as part of that diagnostic approach to assessment and to improving learning for individual children.
Okay, thanks. And final question, it's a generic one. Just in the executive summary on page 5, the last paragraph, I just find the terminology is strange, Derek. The council is taking reasonable steps. That's a kind of legal terminology to say that most of the population would think it's reasonable, but some might not. To ensure that the council arrangements are effective in managing the risks identified by Audit Scotland. Now, I have to say I've not read the Audit Scotland report, but risks are things that might stop you achieving your tasks or objectives. I'd have thought that this would have been more likely to talk about the tasks and objectives that the council is adopting to try and benefit the pupils that this report relates to.
I think that's interesting commentary, Councillor Hume, and my observation on it is in section 3 in the management commentary, and especially what we describe there more as issues rather than risks, to be fair. And one of the reasons we put such a comprehensive management response or commentary into the report was to give members the reassurance that we did have a comprehensive approach to addressing the issues that were raised. So whether we call them risks or issues, we see these as issues. But I think it's fair enough to say that, and you understand that Audit Scotland's report was produced last, I think, March or April. Therefore, they were highlighting some risks at national level that the poverty-related attainment gap was not going to close as quickly as the government had hoped with the spend it had put in place. So I think to provide the members, both of this panel and also of the Education and Families Committee in the form of the scrutiny we had there as well, with the reassurance, we've said, right, these are the things we are doing. And bear in mind that the Audit Scotland report was partly positioned to highlight this issue prior to the election and as we are emerging, hopefully, from the whole COVID response period. So therefore, it really, really is important to me, and I think it would be important to every member of the Education and Families Committee, that we really are absolutely focused at this stage on achieving as much as possible in terms of really taking the young people forward in their educational attainment and their life opportunities. And I mean attainment and achievement in the widest sense. So we felt that teed up the management commentary, which focuses in on the issues with the sections that are in that section. Hopefully that answers the question, Councillor Hume.
It does. Thanks, Chair. Yeah, our group took this report really seriously, which is the reason that I had so many questions to ask. So thanks for that, everyone.
Thanks very much, Jim. Jim, don't be concerned about the number of questions. That's absolutely what we're here for. So we're delighted you're asking questions. No problem.
Conveners usually tell me not to ask questions, Sandy. So thanks very much.
That's what we're here for. Helen?
Hi there. A question for Derek, if that's okay. Derek, much of what I wanted to bring forward is partially covered by Councillor Hume. Just you sound that you're quite heartened at the measure of success. If we're mindful that this isn't until 2019 that the improvement plans that the local authority is taking has brought Northland forward. Can I just ask, in relation to page 12 and the means that the current programme in the SAC, the Scottish Attainment Challenge Plan, are at risk beyond March 2022, and obviously the expectation was that great leaps would have been made in that time, and that doesn't appear to be the case. Locally, can I ask, with regards to the blended learning and the children that are at the centre of the Attainment Challenge, is there ambition to bring cluster groups on, for the cluster groups to have on-site teacher access for the children that obviously would most most advantaged by that, rather than, we find that the blended learning, although the aspect to digital poverty may have been addressed, maybe the uptake on that digital learning is not what we would have expected from the children most impacted with the Attainment Challenge. Is that what your findings are?
Well, there's a few things in there, if it's okay, Councillor Walker. I think I would need to kind of give you quite a detailed response about a few things, but I'll try and do it quickly. First of all, on the funding scenario, Scottish Government have made certain commitments to their first 100 days, including an uplift in teacher numbers. And we've been told through Scottish Government officials that there'll be clarity in the autumn as to how the £1 billion that's been set aside by the government to close the poverty-related attainment gap will be distributed for the lifetime of the Parliament. And it really seems to be coming down to what will be funded through PEF and what does the future of the SAC programme look like. So we expect a continuation of the funding. We're just not sure entirely about how that will look, but we have engaged with Scottish Government officials on it. So I think that is a big thing to say. The second thing on teachers who can help children, bear in mind we've taken the view that we need to make sure we can manage contingency next year. We don't know what the restrictions will be. So through the COVID budget, the recovery budget process, we've identified and given probationers in North Lanarkshire, including those who were emerging after year one of their post-probation. So this is the year two post-probationers and the year one post-probationers, all a job for next year. And that allows us to create capacity to have Pathfinder staff who can really work on learning loss and digital learning next year. So we'll have about 46 of those staff that can be distributed across the piece and they can do additional work. But it's more about training teachers and upskilling the profession so that all children benefit, rather than just specifically focusing on specific groups of children, although that is also important. But through the whole system, we'll be able to do that. And through our cluster approach generally, we have a comprehensive approach to the most vulnerable children and those with additional support needs. And there's been all sorts of stuff done through education and families on that issue. And I could talk at length about that if you wish me to. On the digital access issue, to reassure members, we've distributed already about 7,000 devices through Connecting Scotland. Funding, that was 1.6 million, came from Scottish Government. We also had some resource ourselves as a council. 7,000 devices went out to those who were in the free school meal category. And we think that obviously with Scottish Government's announcement that all children will have a device, we are expecting further funding announcements to come forward, which will help us with that. And all I can say to you on digital access and engagement, Councillor Walker, there was a few things in the pandemic that became clear to us. First of all, the digital way of engaging with learning did not suit all children. So schools did adapt. And so some were getting remote learning, but not digital. But the vast majority were getting digital learning. And the uptake we had for it was exceptionally high. And we published through Education and Families reports which document the level of parental satisfaction and pupil satisfaction with the digital offer. And it's an extremely high level, and indeed engagement also. And I would say to you that therefore going forward, we're in really a good position. In this report, it mentions the fact we had through our virtual classroom, and bear in mind that was built by our practitioners with us and for us, 600,000 children and families engaged with the virtual classroom between January and March during lockdown. That's exceptional. That's exceptional across the country. That's really bucking all the national trends. And also, I think we'll be the only local authority that's done the population-wide wellbeing survey. And I definitely will say to you that there won't be another local authority with data for 42,000 children about where they are with their wellbeing that can be a springboard for us to plan for the future. We are being increasingly data informed and intelligent. This goes back to Councillor Hume's questions. We're being increasingly data informed and intelligent, and we're increasingly about building the capacity of the profession to make good decisions about what learners need, both individually and school-wise and system-wise.
Thanks, Derek. Helen, are you okay with that? Are you wanting?
Just a quick supplemental. I appreciate that those figures are phenomenal, and of course, again, it is on the virtual learning capacity. Is there a set of figures for those children that are not engaged? The children, despite being through the attainment challenge, furnished with the capacity, your laptops, etc. Is there any data on those children most at risk that are not engaging? And obviously those are the children that are central to their challenge. I'm can appreciate fantastic figures for those children that we may well expect to engage, but the children that are most at risk in the challenge figures, do we have any indication if those children are not engaging?
Yeah, and one of the, I think from the parallel piece of work, and I should probably have said this, from January to Easter, and Alison's here, so she may wish to come in on this. There was a parallel piece of work for what we always do, Councillor Lochran, is we always think, right, universally, what are they all getting? Is there an addition? Is there a group that needs some additional help? And for those who are furthest from achievement, or those who are at greatest risk, what are we doing for those children? And I think your question, when I've been answering that question, I've been talking more broadly about the universal group. But on that specific question, now that I'm understanding that that's what you're asking, for that group with intensive needs, there was a couple of things we did in the pandemic, and from August onwards, but really we absolutely depended on this system from January when we moved into lockdown, and it was about identifying vulnerable children. So when on the December the 19th, when the First Minister announced that there would be an additional week of online learning in January, she talked about those who were really vulnerable. When we got through the definition of that the next week, it was a more of a catch-all definition of vulnerable, and what it meant was we felt that we had to be very clear about who our vulnerable children were and be able to document that across schools, and to be able to make sure that our social work colleagues were basically all talking the same language and we're talking about the same children. So we did have a list of several thousand children that we thought could be in the kind of vulnerable category. And then we had them kind of rag status through social work to the ones that were most vulnerable. And we did a load of work to reconcile the groups of vulnerable children across schools with our social work colleagues. And we had plans in place for all those children. And we had planning for children's wellbeing meetings, at which these children were discussed all the way between January and March. And we made sure there was a plan in place for each of those children. So I feel as though those children got a really positive, supportive kind of offering from the schools. But I will say this, Councillor Lochran, in the pandemic, I engage every month with a group of ASN parent council chairs, and despite the fact that we had an offering for those for children, despite the fact we were doing our best to reach children, there are a number of families who would have found it difficult to engage, and we have listened to those families. Now, I think the schools did adjust the offering to try and put things out that was about helping families cope and helping families engage with learning. But what the families sometimes say to us is, it was very, very difficult if you've got a child at the age of 15 or 16 with significant autism, and who really needed to be in school to learn. It was actually quite difficult for families to do some of that engagement at home. And it was difficult during a lockdown scenario for those children to be reached. So we did what we could for those children, but I don't think anybody would say that a lockdown arrangement of virtual or remote support for those children would be the same or would replicate what they can get in schools. And that's one of the reasons why the council has committed over the summer to building a summer activity programme for the ASN children who've been significantly detrimentally affected by those kinds of lockdown arrangements. And that programme will build up over the summer, and it's mainly to provide a bit of respite and a bit of continuity and normality for the children so that they can have that support across the summer. But I can absolutely reassure you, Councillor Lochran, we have taken every step we could to listen to anybody who needed to tell us something about what those vulnerable children and families were and what we needed to do to meet their needs. And I was really reassured by the work done across education and social work during that period. And this was obviously the subject of regular discussion at Gold Command, where we took a report once a month to Gold Command saying, right, this is what's happening to these children. So what we did, Councillor Lochran, we said, right, this is how the digital piece is going for all children, and this is how the vulnerable children are being dealt with through the system during that lockdown period. And then when they're back in school, of course, then obviously they can reach them through the schools. Hopefully that answers your question. I'm sorry I didn't quite pick up on the nuance the first time, Councillor Lochran.
No, you're fine. It's as I say, there are so many subcategories within the category of vulnerable children. But I'm heartened by that. But I understand there are quite a lot of children that are may not be diagnosed with a particular learning disability, and the poverty aspect in itself is a standalone vulnerability to the family. A lot of those children, I just was keen to understand how we were reaching them, but that's fine. Thank you, Derek.
Thanks, Helen. Alison, do you want to add anything to that, or are you comfortable with what Derek has said?
Thanks, Councillor Watson. I think Derek's covered most of it. Maybe just in relation to Councillor Loughran's last point, the other thing that we did as a partnership in terms of direct support for families has also been reported to Education and Families, but with use of some of our additional funding, we did provide tailored direct support to some of our families who needed something slightly different, starting strength-based conversations, and some of that was to support general well-being, but it was also to support engagement with education. So some families, for example, whose home conditions mitigated against children being able to get private space for engagement, we were buying things like desks and also just being guided by families with things, some children, it was about changes to sleeping arrangements that meant that they were readier and more able to engage, and somewhat it was about supporting family activities that provided some respite or outdoor play for children with disability as well. So as well as the very focused work that Derek's spoken about, we also took that broad approach to well-being and supporting engagement.
Thanks, Alison. Thank you. And then we have Tom.
Thanks, Sandy. My question, Derek, is on 3.24 on page 11. It's the immediate priorities as people's return to in-school learning. The initial focus for the senior phase is in establishing the basis for working grades as per the specific arrangements in the alternative certification model for SQA awards and qualifications in 2021. Could you tell me what's actually going to be happening there? It says at the bottom of this paragraph, the potential for challenges from pupils and parents are considerable and will require to be managed. As you know, in the past, I think it was last year, the number of higher passes jumped about 12% when teachers were asked to make their own estimates. And as you know yourself, in the past, when you drew the red line between those who you predicted to pass and predicted not to pass, that you had to get that right for your own reputation to allow good appeals evidence. And it was also a defence for teachers because it was a national system. What's going to be the position with this? Are we going to have another uproar as per last year? Nationally, I mean.
I hope not, Councillor Johnson. And again, and I'm really sorry, but I'm going to have to give a bit of a detailed response to that because there's a number of things that have been locked into what Councillor Johnson said there that demand a proper response. There's a few things. First of all, in the old days, Councillor Johnson, when you and I taught standard grades, we used to get concordance information and it would have been the subject of inspection material. That information has not been available to schools from SQA as part of National 5 or updated higher arrangements. And so it's not been in the system for a number of years. So that means that really whether SQA hold that data, they don't share it routinely. So we've started to do work from last year around concordance, around estimations versus actual grades. And that was part of a layer of quality assurance that went into the alternative certification model for this year. So there were 3 layers of quality assurance. There was what happened around classrooms within subjects and faculties. There was a cross-schools moderation exercise at the second layer, and there was support and challenge from the local authority to the schools to make sure the system overall was broadly as fair as it could be. And to reassure you on the grades, we've now moved into submitting all the provisional grades to SQA as of the 25th of June. And by August the 10th, the grades will be awarded or confirmed for the pupils, but the pupils will know what their schools have given them, what their teachers have given them. As it stands, we are getting some things in where people are querying, but it's not the huge numbers you might expect. I'm touching wood as I say this, Councillor Johnson, because by and large, I think we did a lot of work with the young people through the schools in the period of April, May and June around the working grades, to tightening them up, to finding the evidence, to moving into the provisional grades that we can then submit to SQA. Our figures for this year are pretty similar to last year, so I can reassure you we've not seen a massive jump. So that shows there's been some rigour in our systems, and I feel the systems have been quite rigorous, and the head teachers believe their systems have been rigorous, and I think that's important. Everything we've done has been done with the support of trade unions, and I really want to thank my trade union colleagues for everything that they've done in support of us with this. But obviously everything we've done is prior to any appeals process. What SQA were worried about, I think, was that we're going to have a large number of appeals across the country. We're not sure that will happen, actually, because that's not necessarily what we're picking up so far. Of course, that could change. So as it stands, I feel as though we ran a robust system. The teachers were part of layers of quality assurance that helped them make judgments. There were ministerial pronouncements, obviously, in the last week before the grades were submitted that were very much clear about the fact that the teacher judgment was what was most important to the ministers. But that did not necessarily weaken the quality assurance arrangements from our point of view, because we had done that formatively as we'd gone along, and we were pretty comfortable with where our schools are. And one of the things I will say, we have dealt with that through a set of arrangements where we'll work with heads teachers in groups of schools of similar size. And what that's done is it's introduced an element of transparency and accountability. So the head teachers have been fair towards one another and have had discussions with one another about what their school data looks like at various stages as we're going through it. But that's not to underestimate the fact that the teacher professional judgment was at the heart of this process, and that was what was important in terms of avoiding some of the scenarios from last year, Councillor Johnson. So hopefully we found a balance. Time will tell, and I'm sure we'll be reporting through the next committee cycle to Education and Families what our data looks like. But I can reassure you today that it looks more similar to last year than different, and therefore I think probably it's not got that huge uplift that may have been anticipated.
Tom, are you okay with that?
Yes, that's fine, thanks.
Right, Tom, thank you. Kenneth?
Thanks, Andy. Hi, Derek. Just first of all, congratulations on the last year. I mean, incredible work done by your full department. Absolutely incredible. You know, to come from probably what was quite a low base, you know, with the sort of blended learning, as everyone likes to call it, the work that you've done over, you know, all the staff have done has been absolutely fantastic. It'll be interesting to see after the OECD report what comes from that next. But my main question was, and this follows on a little bit from Helen's question, we obviously had families who had difficulties, etc., etc. How many students did we lose, Derek, in total? How many became disengaged through no fault of their own or whatever? So I know roughly, you know, from the local area, how many became disengaged and just disappeared off the system for lots of different reasons. Do you know, do you have, obviously you've done so much work behind the scenes with that. Do you know how many we lost who just fell away over North Lanarkshire? And that could be between third year and fourth year, or it could be between fourth and fifth or whatever, but maybe specifically third to fourth. Thanks.
Yeah, so I have to say it's not a picture I'm recognising, Councillor Stevenson. I don't think that's what happened. I think there's two things about engagement. There's where the children engaging with us as a set of services and where they're engaging with learning. So there are a number of children that we thought were really vulnerable that we weren't sure would be able to engage with things like digital learning, but we'd give them some other material. But the most important thing for some families was we were engaging with them. So we're pretty sure we engage with everybody. And we're also pretty sure that the schools can document extremely high levels of engagement with remote and online learning. So if you've got, say, a head teacher, a very experienced, very able head teacher, say in your area, Councillor Stevenson, who's saying to us, or not too far from your area, Councillor Stevenson, who's saying to us, look, I've got about 10–15% of my children that really digital learning is not the solution for them, but I've got this other thing I'm going to do, and we will continue to meet with those children. And then you've got head teachers going out and actually doing weekly drop-ins and just checking with families on the doorstep that they're okay and and handing out packs to people. I mean, the things that were done, Councillor Stevenson, by some of our head teachers were quite phenomenal. but other people found different solutions. And some of the digital stuff, others were able to kind of find a way to kind of get people to engage with things because they had that built up. And I think we had to give people the flexibility to reach their people in different ways. I don't think we lost a lot of third year children. That's not what I'm hearing from the schools. In fact, I can probably give you a bit of reassurance that, broadly speaking, I think the schools did manage to kind of keep the learning going for the vast majority. The thing that bothers me a bit is, and I think this is a thing that will come out, so I'm kind of saying it here because it's a thing that's on my mind, is I feel that, and I say this as the father of a pupil in third year, I feel as though the priority last year may have been on the senior phase in terms of the secondary, and that we're really going to have to look at the historic experience of the second and third year children as they go into the senior phase, because I think an awful lot of energy went into doing the alternative certification model for 4th, 5th and 6th year. And one of the things we're going to really be taking a serious look at come August is, right, how prepared are the third years for 4th years? But it's not just them, Councillor Stevenson, it's also the P7s coming into S1. It's also the nursery children coming into primary 1. Because last year the schools were telling us that because of lockdown, the children emerging through transitions processes weren't always as well prepared emotionally for the challenge of the next thing. So that would be the third year going into 4th year this year, the primary 7s going into 1st year this year, the early years children going into primary 1. But I don't really recognise the picture of us having lost a lot of children. I think what's happened is we've been engaging with some people, and then the learning has kind of kicked in different ways for them. I would also say to you that some people didn't cope with lockdown particularly well because of the challenges they were facing at home, and it would have been difficult to do much more than just engage with them. But we've done loads of things, and Alison's given you some examples of the types of things we've done. Hopefully that answers the question, Councillor Stevens.
Hi, Sandy. Now, can I have just a quick supplementary, or just a comment? Derek, certainly agree with that. I know what my local schools do in the ward, and there was no criticism of the engagement from the school because I know what they actually do, and it's fantastic work. But you're always going to get people who are going to drop out the system, and my question really was round about them disengaging, not the school, not engaging with them, but them being disengaged. And that's what I was worried about as we went through last year. That was all that question was about. Thanks.
Right, Kenneth, thank you. There's no more questions on the chat bar, so item 2 is for noting. Is the committee agreeable to noting that item? Thank you very much. Derek,
Sorry, Chair, it says consider whether a further report should be required.
All right, yes,
and the
okay.
recommendations as well. I certainly think a further report's absolutely required. I don't know whether it should come to audit and scrutiny though. Maybe Derek could comment on that. Or Ken, even if Ken's doing some sort of
yeah, because
review on this.
Can I just say, just a plea as chair or convener of the meeting, that we are a bit there are time issues. This obviously has taken up a while. We want questions. We want questions that are, and the questions have been good, but we are probably straying into operational issues in some cases, which could go to the service committee. But I'll let Ken speak on this. Just Ken.
Yeah, thanks, convener. Yeah, I mean, ultimately it's for the panel to determine what it wishes further reports on. I think the point you've made about the operational issues and lead responsibility for monitoring how the service progresses, this lies with the service committee. Later on in the agenda, you'll see that we've got a report on the corporate risk register, and that this issue is now being placed on that, which means that there will be the opportunity in the future for the committee to receive a report on the management of that corporate risk. That might be a way of allowing the panel to keep keep this subject on its radar. I've already referenced the internal audit work that will be coming to the next meeting. Obviously, the panel is free to determine its own scrutiny activities, and that this could be a subject that it does under that heading. But I mean, ultimately, it's really for the panel to reach a conclusion on that. But I think there are alternative ways in which this subject can come back to this panel.
Jim, are you okay with that?
if I can get reassurance that it'll be comprehensively presented to education and families in the future, that'll do me, along with Ken's comments about aspects of it coming back to this panel.
Hey, Derek?
Everything that's been talked about today is a subject of our ongoing work to recover, and I'll definitely be wishing to bring comprehensive reports in this area, as we have done historically in the last few years through the Education and Families Committee. So I can give reassurance to Councillor Hume on that. And likewise, I mean, obviously, because of the Audit Scotland report, as much as anything else, the corporate risk register being updated gives the natural opportunity for this committee to receive the reports in the manner that that Ken's described. So it's obviously going to be a political thing beyond North Lanarkshire, this issue going forward in the life cycle of the next Parliament, and it'll be interesting to see how it plays. And the most important thing to me is that we do the right thing for the children and families in North Lanarkshire. So that's our statutory obligation, and we need to do that. And I will want to see the gap closing. So I'll want to bring papers that show that that's happening through a relevant committee.
Are you fine with that, Jim?
That's fine, thanks, Chair.
Bob, you're looking to get in?
Just very quickly, Convener, just to say that as a member of the Education and Families Committee, I know the comprehensive paperwork that comes to that committee, and given the discussion today, there is no doubt that Derek will ensure that that paper comes to the committee, and as Ken is saying, that we can scrutinise that coming through this committee as and when. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Bob. So if we're agreeable, then item 2, we will take that for noting. Thank you very much, Derek. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you very
really
much.
appreciate the fact that you're here this morning. Thanks
you.
very much. Thank you. And you can be, that's good. Can I first of all make an apology? I should have introduced Gillian McCready and Alistair Craig from Audit Scotland at the very start of the meeting. New kid on the block, so that's what happens. So apologies, but you're both welcome to this meeting today. Now what we're going to do is we're going to, instead of going on to item 3, we'll go on to item 12 to allow Alison to do her presentation and then let her go. So it's page 203 for item 12. Alison, thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Watson. So members will see in relation to the report that this covers a review of one of the key corporate risks around public protection. So the intention of the report and the appendix, which provides more detail on the risk assessment and the controls, is to give the panel an overview of that risk, the assessment of risk, and of the measures that are in place to mitigate that. It's one of the risks on the Council's corporate risk register that has a high residual scoring, and that's part of the reason why it's prioritised for a report to this panel, and also is reviewed regularly via the corporate management team arrangements, and is a risk that is revisited quarterly in terms of its assessment. So what you will see in the body of the report is information that explains a little bit about why there is a high residual scoring around this risk, which is really about some of the inherent complexity around managing public protection. And then obviously further details of the oversight arrangements. The risk was last reviewed at this panel in December 2018, so 2.5 years ago. And at that point, panel asked for some follow-up information around how learning from case reviews in public protection was disseminated and informed improvement activity, and a further report went to panel in June 2019. Just in relation to an area, I suppose highlighting that this is an area of activity where there is scrutiny. One of the gaps perhaps has been in terms of audit of internal assurance arrangements. A lot of this is done on a multi-agency basis, but Ken's team, as part of their audit programme, are currently looking at that just now and a report will be available shortly that will also identify, beyond the actions that I've included today, any areas that we want to further focus on in terms of improving assurance. So the body of the report gives detail, as some of you will have seen previously, about the structural arrangements that are in place to govern public protection, with ultimately that being overseen by the Chief Officers Group, which is chaired by the Chief Executive. There is also information in that section on performance reporting, both single agency and multi-agency, and some of the case audit activity which happens across the primary public protection fora, particularly in child and adult protection, and happens on a regular basis, as well as some of the multi-agency training and learning arrangements that are in place. There's information about, as we have provided previously, about how we manage case reviews when there are adverse incidents, and also about development activity in that area in the field of child protection, with a new learning review system due to be introduced this year, as well as a broader arrangement around child death reviews. There's information in 2.3 of the report around external scrutiny. You will see that some of the figures and some of the performance reporting is national, and that allows us, there's a core data set, for example, in relation to child protection. There is one being developed in relation to adult protection, and that allows us, through our public protection committees, to do a level of benchmarking with other areas in Scotland. Although a number of external scrutiny bodies do inspect public protection arrangements, you'll note that we haven't had a specific inspection around public protection over the last few years. The most recent covering that area being Children's Services inspection in 14-15. There are, however, a number of inspection programmes in place. They've just not got to North Lanarkshire as yet in their cycle, partly because of a slowing of those scrutiny activities during the pandemic period. But we do obviously continue to look at the learning arising from inspections elsewhere. And we are anticipating that we will have an inspection of adult protection arrangements and external inspection over the next 18 months, possibly sooner than that. There's some information in 2.4 of the report that reflects the particular challenges that were around in relation to delivering our public protection responsibilities during the pandemic period. We did actually substantially revise and have an additional risk which on the corporate risk register that took account of that at the time. So those challenges were really related to some particular challenges around service delivery within the government restrictions at the time, and also the increase in, I suppose, hidden harm because of reduced visibility of some concerns because of the shutdown and wider arrangements within and supports and services within the communities. There was also some evidence of some increased risk in some areas around financial exploitation, criminal exploitation over that period that we have been monitoring closely on a local basis. However, there were particular additional management arrangements put in to support us address that, and these are also described in the report, and they range from more frequent overall chief officer governance meetings to the way that caseloads were prioritised, and also awareness raising of the particular concerns that there was evidence that there was most worry about over that period. I'm glad to say that as we've moved out of some of the more restrictive measures associated with the pandemic, the concern about hidden harm has reduced slightly, referrals into public protection processes have come back to pre-pandemic levels, and therefore the assessment of risk and the scoring is now also back at pre-pandemic levels. Finally, the report covers, just so that members are aware of some of the improvement activity that's happening in the public protection arena. There's particular reference to work that we've done to support oversight, the strengthen oversight arrangements through the lead officers group, through tracking of case reviews, through regular review of resourcing of the multi-agency arrangements, and a planned self-evaluation exercise for the Chief Officers Group, as well as some of the more innovative practice changes that have been implemented over the last year to 18 months since this risk was last looked at panel, and that includes work around joint investigative interviewing to strengthen our response to where children are reported to have experienced abuse or criminal abuse, and also the rollout of contextual safeguarding, which is aimed at strengthening our response to older children and young people who experience extrafamilial harm. So the request is that the panel note the report, happy to take any questions, and if there are areas where panel want more information, I'm happy to provide that.
Thank you, Alison. A good report on an important topic. Jim, you're looking to get in?
Thanks, Chair. It is an important report on a very important topic. And really, it's not a question, but so I hope I'm not jumping in before people. But again, it says consider whether there are any issues that they need to receive further information. I think in light of many of the items in the appendix being in progress, we do need more information, but I'm also aware this is on the corporate risk register, so perhaps Ken again could give us an assurance that his updates on the risk register will include progress on meeting the objectives set out in the appendix.
Yeah, if I can respond to that, convener. Yeah, I mean, as Alison said, a core part of the Council's risk management arrangements is periodic and regular reviews of the corporate risks, and clearly that's also indicated on the residual risk level. So, as Alison alluded to, this is monitored and reviewed on a quarterly basis, given the high inherent risk score. So I think that hopefully you can take some assurance from that. One of the other things, obviously, is that Alison's referenced in the report current internal audit work that we've got underway in this area. And again, I would expect that to be reporting to the September meeting. And a key part of the focus of that work is really looking at the adequacy and effectiveness of the service's own quality assurance arrangements, which will hopefully, give the panel, obviously depending on the results of that audit work, but hopefully will give the panel some additional comfort that the arrangements we have in place are appropriate and are working as intended.
Thanks, Ken. Jim, are you okay with that?
Yes, thanks. Thanks, Chair. That's fine.
Right, Jim. Thanks very much. So item 12 is for noting. The panel agree just to note the content of item 12.
Agreed.
Thanks very much. Alison, thank you for your time. Very much appreciate the fact that you're here today.
Thank you.
We'll see you in due course. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. We now go on to agenda item 3, which is the audit and risk related items in the action log. So Ken, if you can go on with that one.
Yeah, thanks, convener. Yeah, agenda item 3 is really just a report which just hopefully provides the panel with the ability to check back that the things which you have requested updates on or future reports are actually being delivered. You'll see that from the appendix on page 18, the only outstanding issue is in relation to a request from the panel back in September that a report is remitted from the next time the annual whistleblowing report goes to policy and strategy. It's remitted back to this panel for consideration. Due to the pandemic, that didn't happen at the tail end of last year, so I've confirmed with the monitoring officer that report is now expected to go in the September cycle of meetings. So hopefully we will be able to tick that one off the list and get that report in front of the panel reasonably shortly.
Thanks very much, Ken. Does anybody have any questions or points? There's nothing on the chat bar. So agenda item 3 is for noting. We're happy to note item 3.
Great.
Right, thanks. We go on to agenda item 4, which is the internal audit progress report. Ken.
Yeah, thanks, Convener. This is the standard report, the format of which members will be quite familiar. Can I put in a mea culpa? First of all, there are 2 minor errors in Appendix 1 in relation to the audit gradings for a couple of the reports. The assessments which are in the table at Table 1 on page 20 are correct, but a couple of those have been changed on pages 24 and 25. So if you could bear with me on that, and I apologise for that error. This report presents obviously the full details of the substantive audit reports that we've published in the period since the last update to the panel, which was back in March. So there are 6 substantive reports, and those are detailed in Table 1 on page 20. You'll see from there that 5 of the 6 reports provided positive assurance, with 1 report offering only limited assurance. That report was in relation to work on health and safety, which was considering the adequacy of what I've described as the non-COVID health and safety arrangements. A particular focus on that work on how the service had progressed issues raised in a previous report back in April 2018. And at paragraphs 2.7 through to 2.9, I provide a little bit of context around that. I think you'll see at paragraph 2.9 that the management felt that the overall audit grading was probably a little bit harsh, but you'll see from the management responses that they have agreed and committed to progress actions in response to the audit findings. I think in particular it's worth noting that a revised safety and wellbeing policy and strategy has now been approved by corporate management team. So that and included within that is a significant element around improving and regularising and formalising the quality assurance arrangements associated with our health and safety arrangements and enhanced governance arrangements. So although the audit report offered a limited assurance, I'm somewhat content that the matters have been substantively progressed by the service since the audit report was finalised. At paragraph 2.10, I reflect on our work on the Economic Regeneration Development Plan, which, whilst generally providing positive assurance, did raise a number of issues, one of which really is around the need to develop more effective performance monitoring and benefits realisation processes to allow management to more accurately measure and monitor performance against the wider objectives that we have. And also to consider setting more effective and realistic sort of short, medium and longer term goals and milestones to enable oversight of progress. I think the key challenge there is that getting that right will provide a much clearer framework for management and also for elected members to better assess how we are doing and to prioritise planned future actions. At 2.12, I've highlighted the work we've done on managing strategic change. Again, the overall results were quite positive, but we have highlighted some areas for improvement, and members who've read the detailed papers will see that the service have disagreed with one of those, which really relates to our thoughts about the kind of current reporting and arrangements around the programme of work, where we felt there was still some scope for further improvements. I think it's fair to say that the officers disagreed with that and felt that the current arrangements were adequate. In terms of other work, I've highlighted at 2.14 one kind of ongoing fraud irregularity in the period that I'm required to report to you in accordance with the agreed internal audit reporting protocol. You'll see from the narrative at 2.14 to 2.16 that it has been referred to the police, so I don't want to say too much in terms of the detail, but I think members should take some comfort from the fact that the detective controls in place did identify the issue at a relatively early stage, meaning that the value of the fraud was relatively low. But we did do some work and issued a report to management to allow them to strengthen the current controls with a view to reducing the scope for such an issue arising in the future. And I'm pleased to say that they've responded positively and have implemented all the audit recommendations. So that's really all I wanted to highlight. I'm obviously happy to take any questions or respond to any comments members have.
Jim, you've got something on this? Yeah, on you go, Jim.
Yeah, the ERDP on 210, it says reasonable assurance. I have to say, my experience of reasonable assurance, when you go on to say, most significantly, we consider the need to develop more effective performance monitoring and benefits realisation. I don't see how something could be considered reasonable assurance or indeed successful unless these steps are in place. Could you explain that a bit to me?
Yeah, I mean the scope of that piece of work is quite wide and obviously reflecting the overall way in which we are managing that what is a significant programme of work covering a broad range of issues. Obviously the ERDP and the associated action plans and strategies and other plans that underpin it are quite broad in scope. So the key focus there is on the overall adequacy of the kind of governance arrangements. And that covers a whole range of considerations in terms of how we plan, manage and implement a whole range of activities. So I think we felt that overall that audit grading of reasonable was appropriate, but we have flagged up, as you rightly say, an issue which I think is a challenge for the service given the longer term nature of some of the impacts we want to have. So it's quite easy to and there are detailed action plans for individual projects which will say we plan to do X or Y by A or B, but some of that how that fits into the wider longer term objectives we have about impacting the kind of local economy for the benefit of kind of local communities is a bit of a challenge, and we've rightly, as you say, we've indicated that that's an area where I think we feel the need to strengthen and put in place better arrangements. So that's really the kind of the rationale for how we've arrived at that overall audit opinion.
Jim, are you okay with that?
Yes, thanks, Steve. I just like to be kept apprised of the status on these items about performance measurement and benefits realisation in the future, and I'm sure Ken will do that for us.
Thanks, Jim. There's no other names on the chat bar. Can I just ask maybe a couple of things, Ken? I noticed on, let me just get this slide, there's 2 occasions, pages 21 and page 92, where management has disagreed with you on the recommendations. Is that unusual? I mean, I don't seem to recollect it happening too often in the past. And is the onus falling on them then if they disagree and proceed as they think best?
Take those points separately. Yes, it's unusual. I mean, I think we would normally enter into discussion with management on draft reports with a view to presenting the panel with reports which are agreed and where there is a consensus as to the issues raised and the actions which management plans to take in response. Occasionally that will not be possible. There is a difference of views and opinions. In this instance, we presented that to the panel partly for in order to be open and transparent. There is a difference of opinion. Where that occurs, effectively management is accepting any risk associated with not taking forward that action. As I say, that particular aspect of the kind of qualitative aspects of reports submitted to committee, I think is one which we've raised in a number of different ways in different places over the last 18 months. I think the reports are better than they used to be. Audit's opinion is they could probably be better, but I think management's view really is that the arrangements in place at the moment to ensure that the reports and the programme of work that go to committee are of a consistent standard, are adequate, and therefore that's why the disagreement is noted on the face of the audit.
Thanks, Ken. And on page 68, when in fact there was an overpayment probably of salary, which was discovered in July 20, but it wasn't stopped until December 20, and there's no repayments or schedule for repayments being arranged yet. Just noticed that one. Thanks, Ken.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I mean, as I think I've indicated to the committee before, and as self-evident from some of the issues that we find when we're reviewing payroll, the council's payroll arrangements aren't necessarily somewhat complex, reflecting the kind of huge range of different tasks and activities and types of employees we have. As a general position, the council's position on seeking recovery for overpayments is relatively well established, and is predicated particularly on those cases where the employee should have reasonably known that an overpayment had occurred. You'll see from the management response that we've obviously raised the need to conclude a payment agreement, and management have committed to do that in short order, so that will be progressed in line with normal arrangements for seeking recoveries.
Right, Ken, thanks. Linda, you were looking to get in there.
Thanks, convener. I just
Yeah.
wanted to add a little bit of context around the item you had mentioned on page 92. So it flows through from page 28, page 92, 95 around the managing strategic change. And the reason that we had to put some comments back to Ken that you've pulled out today was the fact that there were new corporate management team arrangements being implemented at the same time as this audit was being carried out, and the programme of work was in the process of being approved at committee. So from our point of view, we felt that the timing perhaps of that audit just clashed with new arrangements that were already being processed and will be monitored as part of the overall governance reviews of the council in the coming months.
Okay, Linda, thanks for the explanation. That's helpful. There's no other names on the chat bar. So the recommendations on agenda item 4 is to note the findings, conclusions and recommendations of the internal audit report. Consider whether there are any issues raised by internal audit which the panel considers are sufficiently significant to require a further report, and request that the internal audit provide a report to future meetings of the panel reporting progress made by management, implementing agreed management actions in relation to all audit recommendations categorised red or amber, and otherwise note the report. Are we fine with that, to note the report?
Agreed.
Agreed. Great. Well, that's fine. We go on now to page 97, which is agenda item 5. And we're certainly motoring along now, so this is good. So page 97, again, it's Ken. So if we could just get Ken to do the follow-up actions previously agreed by management in response to audit recommendations. Thanks, Ken.
Thanks, convener. Yeah, the purpose of this report is obviously following on from the previous recommendation. We follow up the extent to which management have implemented those actions previously committed in response to all red and amber internal audit recommendations, and this report also covers off all recommendations included in the external audit reports. The executive summary on page 97 sort of summarises the progress to date, and based on previous discussions, we as part of our work in doing the follow-up work, sort of risk assess the extent to which where those issues are not yet fully implemented, what the residual risk is, and it's those issues in particular I probably just want to move straight to, and those are detailed effectively in Appendix 1 on page 101-245, where there are 5 issues which we've assessed where the management action is not yet complete and the residual risk remains as medium or higher. If I can just kind of go through each of those. The first one is the responsibility of me, so hopefully that gives the panel comfort that we're reasonably independent in terms of separating my responsibilities for audit and risk. That issue will be substantively progressed as a result of the recent review by the CMT of the corporate risk register, which has agreed a number of changes to some of the corporate risks, and we'll touch on some of that later on in the agenda. Item 2 there, really in relation to the way in which we are setting out our approach and implementing our approach to backups, you'll see there that the most recent management narrative really has an indication of some additional resource being put into this area, with a revised timescale for identifying, reviewing current backup strategies, documenting what the appropriate backup testing approach is, and clearly the key part there will then be ensuring that that new approach is subsequently implemented. So that's an area where I think we will continue to keep a close eye on progress. Item 3 in relation to the disaster recovery, also a sort of similar area. Again, the most recent management action focused on the developing and formalising a test strategy. That's now been given a revised deadline, and I know Grant's on the call, and he'd probably say a little bit about how some of the kind of pandemic and other work pressures have impacted on the ability to progress some of those issues. Item 4 is one where I suppose in a sense I will challenge the panel as to whether or not they wish to get further information from relevant management, but it really is around the response to our previous audit recommendation about the need for management to set short, medium and longer term targets in relation to carbon emissions that help support the delivery of local and national ambitions, and also to subsidiary element there around making sure we've got appropriate performance management arrangements and reporting arrangements in this. I suppose from an audit perspective, that issue continues to be a little bit up in the air. We've obviously gone through a period where all public bodies have almost had an arms race in terms of bringing forward their commitments to net zero. UK, Scottish local authorities and other public bodies have all set targets, and there has almost been a degree of competition to make those as early as possible. From an audit perspective, the challenge is that I'm not sure we know yet how we are going to do that. And you'll see from the management response there that there's a focus on ensuring that future capital budgets are allocated in a way that allows us to identify and meet and respond to some of the key challenges we face. I suppose from an audit perspective, the concern is that that approach, whilst absolutely appropriate and understandable, there are some issues that we need to address, particularly around removing the use of fossil fuels in heating in council homes, for instance, where there clearly will need to be a huge significant capital investment. But there's a whole range of other challenges that we face around non-capital spend and how that relates to our carbon targets. So that's an area that continues to be outstanding, and as I say, there may well be, we will continue to follow that up, but it may be that's something the panel wants to reflect on. Section 5 in relation to self-directed support in social work, I'm reasonably comfortable there that although that's not yet complete, we're now at a stage where the kind of comprehensive guidance that's necessary has been prepared, and training on that is now planned to be rolled out from after the summer. So hopefully that one will be able to be removed from this report, and we'll hit that milestone. So those are some of the issues really arising from the work. I'm obviously happy to take any.
Thanks, Ken. Jim?
Thanks, Chair. I've got questions most of the items in the appendix. If I can just take them one at a time. Item 1, risk management. My original question was why hasn't it been done? These are corporate risks which the corporate management team deem significant enough to record on the register. So I'd have thought they were serious enough to have a fair amount of effort expended to make sure they met the date. And it's now moved from March 21 to August 21. I note that you said you covered some of this later, Ken, so if you're going to cover it later, that's fine. If not, I'd like an explanation as to why it's been delayed.
Yeah, I'm happy to deal with that. I mean, the three risks that we're talking about, two of them in particular have been significantly refocused to reflect some wider aspects. So one of them in relation to asset rationalisation was very much focused on the property aspects. Corporate management team have agreed to widen that to reflect some of the wider issues, risks and challenges that will arise from moves towards different service delivery arrangements, of which a reduction in buildings is but one. So that's being redone, and that's now substantively complete. That will be getting signed off hopefully by the corporate lead officer fairly soon. One of the other ones in related to health and social care, where The risk has now been significantly reworded, really to try and reflect some of the changing external landscape following the National Care Review, and obviously the impending 100-day, first 100 days of the Scottish Government's intention to clarify what exactly and how they plan to take forward some of the recommendations. So we're trying to reflect in the risk, some new context within which we've obviously got operational issues and ongoing responsibilities. So those are all being actively updated. They're all substantively now complete, following the decision of the corporate management team. So effectively the delay was to allow the corporate management team to reflect on whether or not the previous risks needed to be reframed. The CMT had agreed that those need to be reframed, and the documentation in relation to those as reframed is now substantively complete and will be getting signed off imminently.
Yeah.
Jim?
Okay, that's fine. Just a general comment about all the risks. Where Ken's explanation's absolutely fine. I wouldn't have needed to ask for an explanation if the rationale and reasons for not meeting a date were included in the description in the appendix. So, Ken, can you consider where any item that you're reporting on where the dates aren't met, that you actually put in a reason for not meeting the dates? I mean, I know we've changed the reports these quite significantly over the years. I think that's something that would help us going forward. It might mean we don't need to ask you so many questions.
I'm happy to do that. Clearly, I'll get that explanation and make sure it's from relevant service management, which obviously is me in this instance, but would be other heads of service in other areas. Happy to do that.
Thanks.
Thanks, Ken.
Item 2, just in the current position, it said information to be gathered to inform backup frequencies now in place with each application scored to ensure appropriate backup disaster coverage are put in place as they are migrated. Is that a digital NL thing? What's the migrated point in that meaning, Ken?
Perhaps it would. Can we ask Grant to respond to issues in relation to that?
Anyone? Yep.
No problem, Ken. Thanks. Yeah, basically, it's kind of business as usual and digital LL, if you like, as we just go through the standard process of applications changing in the organisation. We now have a structure in place, allow us to assess them. We have groups in place in terms of the EAGG, the Enterprise Architecture Group, who can take a view from the side of the organisation, if you like, about the risks that's associated with any particular application, whether that be reputational, functional, operational, etc., as a check to make sure that those right backups and processes are put in place. So we've put a fairly robust process in place now for doing that assessment. It's just as we go through those things naturally coming up for refresh, whether they fit in with a digital NL sprint or whether it's just a contract coming to an end or such like, they then get assessed against those criteria, and we make sure that we do that properly and accordingly.
Okay, thanks. Yeah. Item 3, business continuity, disaster recovery. When I first mentioned these on this panel, management didn't know what I was speaking about. It was a number of years ago, right enough. So I'm glad to see it's there. Again, though, October 19 was the initial date. It's now July 21. I need to know if that's achievable, Ken, now. Are you comfortable that there'll actually be DR and BC plans in place by then?
Again, can I refer that to Grant?
Yes, you can.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, there is a DR plan that the council has, and it's had a DR plan for a good number of years, and it's up to the individual services to maintain their own business continuity plans. Business Solutions has its own business continuity plan. So these things are most definitely there. It's the refresh of these and the updating of them to meet the current circumstances. Unfortunately, I hate to play the COVID card, but the last 15, 16 months has thrown us into massive amount of change and a massive amount of effort in other areas. So we have had to not necessarily pick or choose, but some of the effort in some of these key areas is dropped down where we'd like it to be. But like I say, I think we do have robust processes in place to make sure that we govern these things correctly going forward, and the actual categorisation of each of those applications and how they sit in within the DR plan most definitely will be done by that date that's mentioned. Yes.
Thanks, Grant.
Just the point I wanted to make there was even the previous item, it mentioned lots of things, migration, being migrated. You know, and I just wanted reassurance that with so much change going on, that BC and DR was treated seriously. With all the new processes and programs coming into place. So if we can be reassured that everything's been kept up to date and that date's okay, then I'm quite happy with that.
If I can just come back in there slightly, I would say that you can be reassured that it's now dealt with better. And as we go through those processes of any of those migrations, it will be dealt with in a much better manner. The data steward, data govern model that we've now got in place allows us to take that standard approach to things. And as I say, using groups like the EAGG and even the Data Governance Board helps us have that structure and strategy round about making sure that solutions aren't being put in place which maybe weren't done quite correctly because they weren't being held to a central standard, which they now are.
Yeah. Next one is item 4, carbon management. Proposed management action, the second last column. All services should be reviewing their current revenue and capital allocation, and I guess preparing reports on them. Who will get sight of those reports for the revenue and capital allocation in relation to carbon management? Anyone?
Well, I suppose the issue is that obviously revenue and the reports on revenue and capital spend will go to finance and resources and to service committees as relevant, in line with normal arrangements. Obviously, this recent decision of the council to expand one of the impact sections of the report to allow services to reflect on effectively on the carbon impacts. I'm trying to remember the exact wording of the motion, but the carbon impacts effectively of decisions that have been taken should raise and heighten the profile which carbon has in relation to decision making. I don't know whether Elaine wants to say anything in relation to kind of the capital allocation.
So the capital monitoring reports will be submitted to Finance and Resources as usual, Councillor Hume. In relation to carbon, I think the point here is that the allocation should be considered to make sure that the carbon aspect is fully covered. And if not, they would be considered that for future iterations of the capital programme. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, okay, thanks. Thanks, Chair, thanks.
You find him, yeah. I mean, Ken flagged up carbon management. Do we want to go into that in greater detail? Is that what you're thinking, Ken? But maybe a closer look at that area.
Ultimately, for the panel, obviously to determine. I think the issue would be if you look at the kind of current position per the management update, it talks about the short and medium term projects will be informed by capital projects, and this will also enable target setting. I think from an audit perspective, the challenge there is we've not got that long if we are to achieve net zero by the date that the council have indicated they wish to. And the blunt way of putting that is, do we have any clue as to what we need to do in order to get to that date? And setting some short and medium term targets would at least allow us to gauge whether or not it was feasible for us to achieve the aspiration, and also for members to get some comfort that we have a reasonable understanding about the actions we need to take in order to make that progress towards that. So ultimately, I think it's an area we'll probably want to revisit from an audit perspective at some point anyway, but it was, as I say, I think the narrative there is such that it may be appropriate for the panel to ask for further clarity from management on what the kind of current approach to planning is.
Thanks, Ken. Are we agreeable then that we go back on the carbon management one and get a closer look at it? Is everybody happy with that? That's good, thank you. There's nobody else on the chat bar, so item 5. They're asked to note the contents of the report and consider whether there are any issues arising from this report from which they wish to receive further information. So that would be the carbon management, if we're fine with that. So we're happy to note item 5.
Agreed.
Right, thanks. That takes us to item 6, page 109, which is the internal audit annual plan 21-22. Ken, you're back again.
Thanks, Convener, and apologies for the way we structured this agenda, that you have to listen to me droning on for we should have mixed the items up a bit. The purpose of this report is to present the proposed internal audit plan for 21-22 for your consideration and approval. The proposed programme has been discussed with and endorsed by the corporate management team, but it's important that you remember that responsibility for the approval of the plan lies with the panel. And although senior management is consulted in the preparation and development of the plan, it's my responsibility solely for determining the content. So the plan follows a well-established planning methodology, which its kind of strategic level is designed to ensure a reasonable cyclical coverage of key corporate risks, key corporate priorities as outlined in the programme of work, key governance arrangements, and key financial systems. And for 21-22, it obviously incorporates as appropriate some of the impacts of the Council's ongoing response to the COVID-19 pandemic. So apologies for the vast number of pages in terms of appendices. You'll be pleased to know I'm not going to go through those, but really that's just for complete transparency to let you understand some of the thinking that we've taken forward in bringing forward the actual detailed list of proposals that we plan to assignments that we plan to undertake next year. So the report itself, section 1, really just sets out some of the kind of the background. Nothing in there particular I want to highlight. In section 2, really just reflect on the wider audit environment, and obviously we already had quite a complex environment before we added some of the significant changes and some of the kind of structures, governance processes, and ongoing service delivery arrangements that have resulted from the pandemic. So a lot going on, but in essence, the planning considerations mean that we've got a sort of framework that allows us to come up with a programme of work that will ultimately provide a sufficient body of work for me to provide an annual audit opinion on the Council's control, governance and risk arrangements, which I'm required to do. And obviously we've got last year's opinion later on in the agenda. A couple of things really just to highlight. I think I make this joke every year, but I'm actually formally required to kind of make sure that you're clear on it. So at 210, as part of the annual planning process, I'm required to consider the level of resources, experience and skills available to the team. And I'm saying there I remain satisfied that those are adequate for the function to carry out its role effectively. So that's an important assertion which I'm required to make. At 214, I'm also required to highlight and raise any issues in relation to the independence of the function. Obviously, we have a slightly unusual role within the organisation in terms of our independence and objectivity, so that's quite important. But you'll see at paragraph 214 that I have no concerns in relation to any of those aspects. 216, I've also highlighted the potential conflict of interest which could arise from the fact that I'm responsible for the Council's risk management arrangements. But we've previously outlined to the panel how we manage that conflict of interest, and those arrangements will continue this year and are embedded within the internal audit charter. So, and hopefully as well, the panel has had some comfort from the recent audit work in terms of risk management that work has been done independently and is sufficiently robust. So really, bring your attention to Appendix 1, which is the detailed list of assignments that we plan to undertake in the year ahead. I think it covers a broad range of activities, and I think reflects the scale of the Council's activities and ambitions. So really, other than that, I would just happy to take any comments or questions. that members have.
Thanks, Ken. Jim?
Thanks, Chair. I note from this report, Ken, that you mentioned procurement in a couple of places in terms of your resource allocation, and at page 121 specifically, you mentioned it as a high risk. I recollect from the external auditors report that they also specifically identify procurement as a high risk aspect for things going wrong. I would make a request that as part of your resource allocation, you look into single tender contract awards, which I seem to be seeing more and more of in the various committees that I'm on. I'm by no means suggesting that there's anything untoward happening, but in light of your comments about significant risks and the external auditors, a single tender leaves itself open to question, and I would like that reviewed as part of your specific work on procurement.
Ken?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. I mean, we've obviously included work in procurement, which will include work looking at a sample of individual contract awards. So I'm happy to reflect on the point that Councillor Hume's made. I mean, clearly, I recognise that single tender contract awards are inherently riskier in terms of ensuring best value and adequate competition, and obviously create some potential risks as well around why we've got ourselves into the position where we only have that. So I'm happy to reflect on that in terms of the sample of contracts that we look at. I mean, clearly, also I think one of the things we'd want to have a look at is whether or not the level and volume of such awards is high in relation to previous years, and also where comparative data exists. So we'll reflect on that as well, and also the extent to which there is sufficient challenge by procurement professionals and senior management where the service finds themselves going down that route, because it clearly should be the exception and certainly not the norm.
Thanks. Jim, are you okay with that?
That's excellent, Ken. Thanks, Chair. That's fine.
Yeah, I think that's probably a good move. There's nobody else on the chat bar, so item 6, the panel is invited to note the approach adopted to produce the 21-22 internal audit annual plan and consider the detailed list of proposed internal audit assignments for 21-22. Subject to any changes agreed by the Audit and Risk Manager arising from discussions with the panel during consideration of the proposed assignments, I'd be above approve the proposed 21-22 internal audit annual plan, Appendix 1. Are we fine about approving the plan? Great, thanks very much. So we go on to item 7, which is on page 151. National Fraud Initiative update. Ken, you again.
Yep, thanks. Okay. You'll get a rest really soon. Yeah, the purpose of this report is the first of a series of reports we'll bring forward, updating the panel on progress made to date by the Council in response to the 2020 National Fraud Initiative, which is a data matching exercise, and to highlight where further action is required by relevant services. It's fair to say we're obviously at a relatively early stage of this NFI cycle, in the sense that we got the data matches back in late February. So in terms of the preparation of this report, we've only had a couple of months to start going through the data. But it's really providing you with an overview of what has come back. Well, first of all, an overview for those who are not familiar with what the National Fraud Initiative is about. So that's obviously in section 1, some of the background there. Section 2 highlights the progress to date. And I think the important thing to recognise is that you get a lot of matches back, but the approach you take to reviewing and investigating those is very much risk-based. So the application itself and also the work undertaken by services allows us to hopefully target our time and attention and resources at those issues of greatest potential concern. In section 2, I also give a bit of narrative in terms of where we are in relation to some of the major categories of data matches. Probably a couple of things worth highlighting, and also possibly anticipating some questions. So Really, the paragraph 2.6 just highlight the work that's been done in relation to blue badges, where we've had significant kind of concerns before about the extent to which the data that we hold is not reflective of recent, in fact, not even just recent, but of deaths in general, which has created a huge amount of noise around that topic. Obviously, because we don't charge for parking, there's no particular financial impact, but it's a particular concern for some of our neighbouring authorities who do have significant foregone income through the fraudulent use of blue badges. So you'll see there that we've put in place, or the service has put in place, arrangements to ensure that that data set is getting much cleaner in that sense. You'll also see over the page, we've got a section in relation to COVID-19 business grants, and I think I think it's reported today, I think the Public Accounts Committee at Westminster are having a session based on a couple of National Audit Office reports today. Wide recognition that there will be significant, and there has been and continues to be significant fraudulent issues in relation to a lot of the COVID-19 support schemes that have been put in place, whilst both organisations more generally and ourselves have tried to put in place robust arrangements to mitigate fraud risks. These grant schemes have been put in place at quite short notice, designed at quite short notice, put in place and implemented at short notice, and also predicated on the need to ensure that decisions were made quite quickly. So I think there's a recognised nationally that there are high fraud risks attached to those. You see there that a number of those data sets have gone in as part of the National Fraud Initiative. We haven't got those matches back yet, but they are expected shortly, and I suspect they will keep some of both the service and my own team in business for quite a while, just pursuing some of those. So so that was really what I wanted to highlight. As I say, it's relatively early days, but we're happy to take any questions in terms of progress today.
There are no names on the chat bar for item 7, so we could just go ahead. The panel's been asked to note the contents of the report. Are we happy to note the contents? Fine. Right, thank you. And then we go on to agenda item 8, which is the external audit, the Audit Scotland Management Report. Is Gillian going to lead on this, Ken, or are you going to? Gillian, could we get Gillian then, please? Thank you, Gillian. Oh, you're on mute. It's okay.
That's a good start. Thanks, convener. Hi, everybody. So this is our management report for the 2021 audit. This report follows on from our plan, which was presented at the last panel meeting, and it summarises the work that we've been doing since then and prior to receiving the annual accounts, which we've received this morning, and starting the audit of those. So it summarises the work we've done on the council's controls in their financial systems and some of our wider audit dimension work. So I'll just run through some of the key points and then I can take some questions, and Alistair's here for questions as well. If I can take you to paragraph 9 from here, this section summarises the results of our controls work. So we take a sample of and test a sample of controls across the council's main financial systems each year, and the results of this is summarised in the following paragraphs. And if I can take you to Exhibit 2, this table sets out the main findings from that. The first point in relation to user access. We've mentioned this in previous years, so there are controls in each of the main financial systems for gaining access and when people leave the council for their access to be removed. But there's also an expected control around annual or biannual reviews of all the users for each system. During 2021, we found that these reviews hadn't taken place, with the exception of the eFinancial General Ledger system. But we also note that internal audit did work on the General Ledger system and found that this review was incomplete. So there's a further exercise underway to follow up on any documentation that's outstanding. So there leaves a level of risk that there may be individuals with access to systems that might not be appropriate. We will substantively test a further sample of users to ensure that their permissions are appropriate. The second point is on payroll validation checks, and some of you may remember this is something that we've kind of told the story of for the last few years. The council have now got a process in place of carrying out validation checks, and last year we were at the stage of reporting that we found it to be incomplete because it didn't require positive confirmation from line managers or departments that the listings were correct. So for 2021, that was still the case. However,
Somebody's maybe not.
But this.
Sorry. I think we're okay now.
We're okay. Sorry. So the positive confirmation was implemented towards the start of 2021 for the education service, and there are for this to be done across the council services during 21-22. So it just leaves the risk for that financial year that there may still have been staff on payroll after they've left employment with the council. So again, we'll take a further sample of employees and check that they exist as employees through confirmation of other records. The third point is in relation to council tax and non-domestic rates. We have always relied on the council's second officer checks on reliefs and discounts, so on existing reliefs and discounts and then new ones that have been awarded in year. But this has been paused during 2020. But I do want to stress that in the context of COVID-19, this is relatively understandable given that the revenues team had to divert their attention and resources away to administering the business grants. So, given that context, it's understandable, but just leaves a risk of some people being in receipt of reliefs and discounts that may not be eligible. So we will again extend our implementation of these reliefs and discounts. The last point in the table is in relation to non-current asset valuations. We raised a point in our annual audit plan about the risk over these, particularly in relation to the material uncertainty in the 1920 accounts over these valuations, and that was as a result of COVID-19 and the impact potentially. So we've done a wee bit of further work on this. The council revalues categories of assets every 5 years. In the years between these valuations, there's no indexation exercise applied, so the value only changes at the 5-year mark. And we've given the kind of explanation of the education property example, and it just means that there is a risk that as the longer after the valuation, that the valuations in the accounts potentially could be inaccurate. And also that site visits were suspended during 2021 for valuations as a result of restrictions, just leads to kind of risk over the year-end valuations. So we will be reviewing management controls over the year-end process to get assurance over the valuers' figures, and how management assess the reasonableness of any valuations, and we'll also look in detail at the council's processes for the year-end impairment review. That summarises our controls findings. If I can take you to paragraph 15, we've got some findings from the work that we've done on financial management under our wider audit dimensions responsibilities. We found again that the council continue to effectively monitor their budget position through the year. They provide budget monitoring reports frequently through the year to CMT and the Finance and Resources Committee. Also, given the challenge and complexity of finances as a result of COVID-19, there's also additional reports to specific committees and to full council. The council also set up the budget recovery group to look at the in-year finances, but also to look at the challenges that would be coming in the years, the kind of medium term, how to address budget gaps, for example. And we found that financial forecasting is well embedded as a part of that management and reporting. We've looked at the summary of outturn reporting of the year, and that is, we've looked at outturn reporting through the year, and this is summarised in Exhibit 3. time of writing the report, the council was projecting a surplus, and the reports were very helpful in splitting this into COVID and non-COVID. And what we'll do is, when it's available to us, we'll look at the year-end provisional outturn and the year-end position in the annual accounts. The last I'm just going to mention is from paragraph 25. You might remember from last year we did a full follow-up of the best value assurance report recommendations. What we've done this year is taken a sample of 4 to look at them in a bit more detail. Exhibit 5 gives you the results of this. So we have concluded 2 of the recommendations now is complete. We are satisfied that the council's got an established and robust process for revising strategies, policies and plans, keeping them up to date and keeping them aligned to the plan, the programme for work. And then also in terms of performance information on the council's website, we're satisfied now that in the relaunch of the council's website in 2020, the new performance section and how well the LGBF indicator data is kept up to date, that the council has a process in place to ensure that all performance information is kept up to date. Just to quickly mention other 2 points. In terms of the Investors in People programme, we've concluded good progress has been made, and that's really just because the full report of findings was still to go to CMT during June, but the council are on track to obtain the full Investors in People accreditation. Finally, the recommendation on improvement plans from self-evaluation exercises. This was probably one of our recommendations that was most impacted by COVID. There was a planned 12-week self-evaluation exercise. It was planned for spring 2020, but this had to be suspended as a result of the restrictions. However, the council's shown a commitment to self-evaluation by self-evaluating on the response to COVID-19. Reports have gone to committee, and the council has really reflected that and created an action plan to address anything. Also, the strategic self-evaluation framework has been updated, and that's been in line with best value guidance. So we've concluded reasonable progress in that one, and we'll look back at that again to hopefully close that off in the future. But that was all I wanted to say, but myself and Alistair are happy to take any questions.
Thanks very much. Are there any questions? There's nothing in the chat bar. You've obviously explained it so well, Gillian, that everybody's had their questions answered. So if there's no questions, the panel's asked to note the report. Are we happy to note the report? Yeah. Okay. Thanks very much. Thanks very much, Gillian. Thanks for coming along. So we go on now to agenda item 9, page 173, which is the PCI DSS compliance progress report. Now, Katrina Hassell's not here, but I think Rob is going to do the presentation on this. Is that right?
Thank you, convener. Yes, I'm happy to.
Right. Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Lead stakeholders through this. So briefly, in 10 short points, just to run through the report. The background, section 1 outlines the why of North Lanarkshire Council's PCI DSS compliance programme. But just to elaborate, the risks associated with not being compliant were highlighted by internal audit back in 2019. And that led to a jointly led programme, Business Solutions and Financial Solutions, to take on the ambition of achieving PCI DSS compliance by September 2021. So to that end, right now we have put a governance framework in place to support that move towards compliance. The PCI DSS Governance Board has been stood up, and this may also act as the main forum for exercising oversight over PCI DS compliance in the longer term, as well as helping us achieve our immediate aim of reaching compliance in the first instance. To that end, the alignment of what were Culture North Lanarkshire and North Lanarkshire Leisure are both within the scope of the Governance Board and are duly represented. We discussed the nature of the data, so the implications of it being subject to both the General Data Protection Regulations and Data Protection Act 2018 are made clear. Paragraph 2.4 of the report hopefully provides some easing of minds that we've ensured the relevant data protection stakeholders are included in the programme of governance. Ultimately though, PCI DSS compliance is demonstrated through assuring against self-assessment questionnaires. Table 1 in paragraph 2.6 shows the self-assessment questionnaires that apply to the Council's various payment streams and the relative difficulty of meeting the conditions within each. There's no getting away, I guess, from the complexity of the Council's payment processes. I would refer elected members to paragraph 2.7. NLC, North Lanarkshire Council, has a variety of systems that are capable of processing card payments. And these have largely been developed in isolation from one another. That's resulted in a wide range of payment offerings being made available that suit the nature of the services being provided, but I guess comes at the expense of there being a single set of explicit standards that these systems all adhere to, hence the complexity that I refer to. Another point that's worth calling out is that within North Lanarkshire Council, we don't really have the necessary skills in-house to achieve compliance in an effective and efficient manner. So to address this particular weakness, and as referred to throughout section 2 of the report, we've engaged with a company called Compliance 3 to make up for that missing capability. I would argue that in real terms, the financial implications of this engagement have been minimal, but in value terms, their support has proven beyond measure. So whether it be supporting or building a communications channel with the compliance departments of acquiring banks or implementing a pragmatic segmented approach to compliance, their advice has been invaluable in taking us to the point we are currently at. Table 2 within section 220 shows the Council's projected compliance position as a red, amber, green status chart as of 30th of September 2021. We're reasonably confident right now of achieving compliance across the e-commerce and person-present payment channels within that time frame. Delays are inevitable, however, for the mail order, telephone order, or MOTO channel, as we refer to it. So the timeline we're looking to align with for implementing a compliant telephony system is outlined in Appendix 1 of the report. MOTO compliance is difficult, just given the fact that we take payments effectively across all of our network. And the resultant SAQ, self-assessment questionnaire D, is quite simply the most onerous of any that an organisation might have to complete. However, we've been in discussion with Lloyds Cardnet, who are our acquiring bank for all MOTO channel transactions. And they've advised that we are not under any threat of being barred from continuing to take payments, and seem reasonably satisfied by our projected, or should I say, by our actual compliance programme. Clearly, the risks to the success of the programme continue to be present. So, for example, these include the lack of knowledgeable staff or support from acquiring banks. We've put some mitigations in place where we can. Others we're less able to do. So, for example, the compliance position of payment service providers, third-party organisations to whom we contract to take payments on our behalf, are more out of our hands. But that really is, in a nutshell, the current state of the compliance programme. And I'm obviously happy to take any questions or hear views from elected members in the meantime. Thank you.
Thanks, Rob. Tom? You're on mute. You're on mute, Tom.
Right. What is a Gladstone system?
Gladstone is a provider of a payment system. So all our payment systems are provided by a payment services provider. So Gladstone is one of those. We have 2 Gladstone systems within the council.
Okay.
Okay, Tom, thank you. Jim?
Thanks. I had a question written down about Lloyds as the acquiring bank setting a date for compliance to be complete, but Rob's reassured us that they're comfortable with the work that's going, so I appreciate that.
Thanks, Jim. Anybody else questions? Can I just ask, are all the local councils, Rob, round about us experiencing the same problems? Likes of South Lanarkshire, West Lothian, Glasgow even? I mean, are they all having this problem, or is it just pertaining to North Lanarkshire?
I can't comment on the status of other local authorities. I will say that Glasgow City Council act as a payment service provider for one of our payment streams, and they are currently non-compliant with PCI DSS, but with an ambition to achieve compliance this year.
Okay, Rob, thanks. Ken?
Yeah, an interesting question. I think from discussions I've had with colleagues at other local authorities, this is an issue that is relatively common across many councils, and I think, as Rob was alluding, really partly reflects the complexity of the kind of IT landscape that we have in relation to processing payments. So, whilst I can't provide an update on any particular council, it is an issue that I know is of some concern to other internal auditors.
Thanks, Ken. If there's no more questions, item 9. Panel is invited to note the content of the report and developments completed to date in progressing the council towards compliance. Note the substantial level of work remains, particularly regarding motor transactions, to achieve compliance, and note the revised timeframe of March 2022 to achieve full compliance. Are we happy to note that? That's fine, thanks very much. Thank you. We then go on to item 10, which brings you back on again, Ken.
Yeah, thanks, Convener. Yeah, this report is obviously presenting the panel with the results of the recent process of annual review of the Corporate Risk Register, which was undertaken by the corporate management team, and to present the kind of current status of the risk register. In terms of the substantive content of the report, section 1 really just lays out some of the background, and the Council's risk management strategy requires that the corporate risk register is formally refreshed on at least an annual basis by the corporate risk team working through and in consultation with the corporate management team. So the annual review exercise has recently been undertaken, and this paper presents the results of that. Section 2, we reflect on the kind of context and the high-level description of how that process is undertaken, and it's important just to reflect that the corporate risk register needs to be reflective of what the council is seeking to achieve at a strategic level, and obviously to ensure that key projects or programme risks are captured. The review of the revised programme of work for 21-22 is approved by the Policy and Strategy Committee back in March this year, suggests that the risks in relation to key planned activities being undertaken are largely or were largely already captured either at corporate service or project level, and all of those documentation at different levels will contain details of relevant controls and actions that help to mitigate some of the risks. So no specific changes were therefore proposed to the corporate risk register as a result of the revised programme of work. Section 2.4, we reflect on some of the kind of key work streams that are currently being progressed as part of wider corporate developments. I've referred before in answer to, I think, Councillor Hume's question, some of the ongoing change in the kind of contextual landscape within which health and social care and health and social care partnerships in the IJBs sit, and obviously that impacts on the council across a number of different aspects. So as part of the consideration of the review, the CMT approved the reframing of the health and social care integration risk to reflect to the kind of changing context. We've also reflected on some of the other kind of work streams that are currently being progressed, but you'll see that there are no specific changes resulting from either the ongoing work in terms of the heads of services, community champions, future structures around communities, or the integration of culture and leisure. Obviously, each of those aspects will be reflected often at service or project level risk registers. As part of the review, we also undertook a kind of high-level sense check of what our corporate risk register looks like compared to other councils, and I think we were reasonably confident from that it appeared appropriate and that it looked relatively comprehensive. So in terms of consideration of the existing risks, a couple of risks were deleted from the corporate risk register. One of those relates to the 1140 hours early years project, which has obviously been the subject of some interest from the panel previously. Based on the kind of current status of that project, which is now substantively moving towards completion, it was felt that that risk no longer needed to sit on the corporate risk register, but would of course be monitored and overseen at service level within education and families. I've referenced the change to the asset management risk, which now reflects more widely the wider strategic and corporate aspects and implications of the asset rationalisation programme. And we've also reflected on and removed, CMT agreed to remove the corporate risk relating to the EU exit, which was created primarily to reflect the expected short-term risks of the UK leaving the EU, particularly if it was on a no-deal basis. So impacts arising immediately were probably not as materially significant as could have been anticipated. And whilst there will be ongoing risks, it's felt that those sit best in terms of consideration of business as usual risk within services. So it will be managed on that basis. One additional risk which has been added relates to the educational attainment gap, and obviously we had a fairly significant discussion about that earlier in the meeting. I think that reflects and is consistent with some of the kind of council's strategic ambitions, particularly those around sort of future employability and economic prosperity, and obviously the intention, corporate focus on the kind of poverty related issues more generally. So that has now been added to the corporate risk register. In relation to the papers, you'll see at Appendix 1, we've included the kind of high-level description of the current corporate risks along with the current residual risk rating. Those are subject to regular review by relevant chief officers and relevant kind of working groups. As we try and avoid having a situation where individual officers are reviewing risks, we tend to identify sort of relevant groups of officers who can come together and discuss relevant issues surrounding those risks. So those are monitored and reviewed on a regular basis, depending on the residual risk rating. In addition, Appendix 2, there's now a process whereby the CMT will consider a fairly detailed report on a specific corporate risk at least once every 2 meetings. So the timetable for those reports is laid out in Appendix 2, and obviously the panel have previously also agreed to take those reports in relation to specific corporate risks, so that you're cited on the management of those and have the opportunity to engage relevant officers. So the proposed timetable for the remainder of 2021 is included at Appendix 2. That was really all I wanted to highlight, but I'm obviously happy to take any questions or respond to any comments.
Thanks, Dan. Hey, Jim.
Thanks, Chair. I know on the page 186 in Appendix 1, Ken, you've got the current risk register, and column 2 gives you the residual risk after the mitigation has been built into the risk score. Is the mitigation plans for all the corporate risks available anywhere?
Oh, you're on mute, Ken.
They're not publicly available. We don't formally report them, but obviously you'll see the sorts of documentation that we have in relation to each of the corporate risks is similar to the information, for instance, that Alison tabled as part of her report. So there's a fairly detailed sort of pages of documentation which takes you through what the kind of assessment of the risk is from management, and then what the control framework and governance arrangement around that risk looks like, together with a section which then outlines further planned actions, which has timescales and the corporate risk, the risk team will kind of monitor progress against those improvement actions. So effectively, I think the question is, the answer to your question is that they're not publicly available, but you would see them as part of the panel papers when the reports come forward on each of those relevant corporate risks.
Okay, thanks. Just to confirm, if you don't mind, where a risk is like health and safety, you're saying it's being reframed. It might need rescored and the mitigation plan redrawn. Is that part of the standard approach? Yes.
Yeah, the health and safety one's not being reframed, but yeah, those risks that are, and that really
social care, yeah.
Yeah, that touches on the point you made earlier about in relation to the follow-up report, where you were questioning the delay in completing the documentation in relation to those risks. You know, obviously reframing the risks means that that entire set of documentation and the relevant controls needs to be re-looked at and worked through and made appropriate to the reframed risk. So that process for those risks is now, as I said earlier, is substantively completed. There is a process whereby we ask the relevant chief officer to go through that process and then agree the documentation with the relevant group that's been tasked with that.
You fine with that, Jim?
That's fine, thanks.
Thanks very much. There's no more names on the chat bar, so for item 10, the panel's invited to note the proposed reframing of the HSCI and asset rationalisation risks, note the removal of the 1140 hours, note the removal of the EU exit risk, note the creation of a new corporate risk in relation to inequality in educational attainment, and note the revised corporate risk register for 21-22 as Appendix 1 and reporting schedule Appendix 2. Are we happy to note the items for item 10? Thanks very much. That takes us to item 11, which is information security. Now, if Katrina's not here, are you doing this one, Rob?
I am indeed, convener. I'm happy to take the panel through.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
This risk has a high residual score of 20 and an inherent score of 25. Hence, we've all got a very keen interest in this, no doubt. Information security and information governance risk is something that's probably always going to be with us. There's no getting away from that, simply given the complexity of North Lanarkshire Council operations. More generically, widespread modern information management practice. And of course, the nature of the risk landscape. In addition, and this is just my own personal point, I would say that we now have more data to protect across more systems, plus more regulation and legislation than historically would have been the case. And the obvious point needs to be made that we have to, at all times, be trying to support the use of information. So there's always going to be a tension between the need for governance and security and the need for an effective and efficient way of accessing and using information in information processing systems. I would draw elected members' attention to paragraphs 1.4 and 1.5, which highlight relatively recent environmental changes which have taken place and which have had a significant impact on most organisations' risk exposure, and to which the Council is no exception. In section 2.1, we highlight the risk scoring that we've associated with this particular risk and which I've previously mentioned. Moving further into the body of the report, in section 2.3, we outline those internal risk factors as well as reinforcing external ones which have all had a bearing on this particular risk. In terms of more recent wide-scale processes to address risk, I would highlight the controls and actions discussed in section 2.5, paragraph 2.5. These do eke out in a little bit of detail the headline procedural and governance controls in play at the moment, the latter being further explored in paragraph 2.7. This calls out the role of the Data Governance Board and Data Management Team as the primary forums for exercising strategic and operational information management and security strategy. I would also ask elected members to note that these don't sit in isolation from the activities of other stakeholders and associated forums. So, for example, they link to the Senior Information Risk Officer, who chairs the Data Governance Board, and service representatives who sit on the data management team. From a more technical perspective, I would refer elected members to paragraph 2.9, which outlines the suite of cyber controls currently implemented across the Council's ICT estate. And as outlined in paragraphs 210, 212 and 213, we don't ignore the need for effective and ongoing training and awareness raising for all stakeholders across the Council. As part of an ongoing series of continual improvements to information management and security posture, we outline in 211 a suite of enhancements we intend to implement over the forthcoming year. And in terms of assuring compliance, we have currently or previously endeavoured to ensure that we comply to external standards such as Cyber Essentials, Public Sector Network Code of Connection. I would draw attention to paragraph 2.15, where it's made clear that not all these compliance programmes have been deemed suitable by some local authorities. So their future is still to be fully determined. I would primarily refer there to Cyber Essentials. Appendix 1 contains the deep dive report of this risk. So it provides further detail obviously about its context and the status of current controls and actions. In summary though, I hope this has been a reasonable high altitude flyover of this risk, and as before, I welcome any questions or views from elected members. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Rob. Jim?
Thanks. On page 193, you actually mentioned the paragraphs 212 and 213. They make it clear that you understand the need for staff training. But what, and you alluded to it in your comments, but what it doesn't make clear is where you are in terms of your thoughts around staff training levels, current requirements and future requirements, because I would like reassurance that you've got programs in place to train all staff on information cyber security. And I would also like to be reassured that with the rapidly changing landscape that information security lives in, that staff training will be kept up to date, and the programme includes measures for that. So current position want some comfort that staff training has been completed, and future that amendments to the information security environment will be accommodated in training plans.
Of course, Councillor Hume. We have a Learn NL environment that you know about, and within that we host a variety of what we call information governance training modules, one of which is information security, but we also cover data protection essentials. We cover data protection advanced principles as well. We have made a suite of those training modules essential for all staff now. So those include the information security module, the data protection essentials module, information management, records management module within business solutions, just given the fact that we've got so many staff who have access and who may be processing sensitive information. We're ensuring that all staff have to undertake the data protection advanced module as well. We have been refreshing our pages on Connect. So we have been extending or increasing the size of the information risk management team. So we now have a person on board who's dedicated to information awareness and raising awareness across relevant stakeholders within the council, Councillor Hume. So you may have seen that we now have a forum within Yammer that's dedicated to information security, where concerns can be raised and where we will be posting out newsworthy advice and details of more recent compromises and how they might be addressed. So I think we're starting to get there, Councillor Hume. I'll never say we are perfect, but we have a programme of work in place that I think has made considerable inroads in that particular area over the last number of months.
Yep. Ken, do you want to just, before we bring Jim back in again, Ken, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose there's, to be honest, my previous employer, if I didn't do some of the mandatory training within a due date, I didn't get paid the following month. So I do recommend that when we're discussing this, but it usually goes down like a lead balloon with colleagues. As Rob was saying, there's been a great deal of attention and focus on training, which I think Councillor Hume's rightly identified as a key part of the Council's defences. One of the things that Rob's alluded to is obviously the fact that we've made and identified certain training courses as mandatory. One of the things that we're doing to kind of even provide a degree of greater robustness around that is that increasingly through the iTrent system, training requirements for each individual post will be attached to that post, so that at the moment we've got managers need to make sort of judgments about who should be and which groups of staff should do which training, and it's quite difficult on a kind of corporate level to monitor compliance. So we can quite often see the numbers of staff who've done training, but we don't know what percentage of the population who should have done that training have done it. That will increasingly be much easier to kind of get a handle on. Because that will be the training will be attached to a specific post, and all posts will have the kind of mandatory and required training attached, and we'll be able to kind of cut and slice and dice the information. But there is quite a focus on training. Data on training uptake is monitored and discussed in a number of different forums. And as I say, the intention is to move increasingly to a system where we'll actually have at the touch of a button, an update, and which will allow us to see what percentage of staff have done what they're expected to have done.
Thanks, Ken. Jim?
Yeah, thanks. I'm reassured by the answers. Obviously, what prompted the question was the many instances of even large technology firms having data breaches, and even ransomware included in large companies. I really didn't want North Lanarkshire to be mentioned in a category of organisations that had a data breach and important residents' information out there became publicly known. So it sounds to me like the guys understand the importance of it, and I'm reassured by the work that's going. But it does need to be taken continuously seriously and monitored in the future. Thanks.
Thanks, Jim. Ken?
Yeah, really, I think just to reiterate the point I'm sure Katrina would want to make if she was here, is that there's a lot of corporate focus on this. The residual risk score is high, and that is not uncommon, as we know from examples such as SEPA. Issues and factors which can arise, or things which can arise as off the back of this, can be absolutely debilitating to organisations. So it's an area where there is a keen understanding. Hopefully, the report has given members the sense that there is a keen understanding of the risks we face, that we've put in place arrangements that appear appropriate, and we've got appropriate arrangements in place to kind of monitor their effectiveness. But this is an area that will always have a high residual risk, just by the nature of how organisations are organised now, and some of the key vulnerabilities which you can hope to mitigate, but you can never absolutely eliminate.
Thanks, Ken. Graham, are you wanting to add anything to that? No.
Was that myself, Grant?
Yes, Grant.
Yeah, no, that's no problem at all.
I just saw the GR, and then of course I saw it was up as Graham, so I thought it must be Graham, but it's Grant. That's
just
fine.
Go with that. Yeah, I'll answer to anything.
Do you want to add anything?
Not in particular. I think between Ken and Rob, they've covered off all the points. The one wee small thing I would say is impossible for us to sit here and say that 100% we'll never have a data breach. We'll never be a victim of ransomware and such. Like, these things evolve all the time, and the human element is always in there. So it's all about the processes round about it that mitigate it and respond to it.
Right, Grant. Thanks very much. Thank you. There's nothing else on the chat bar, so agenda item 11. We're asked to note the actions taken to date to manage the information security and information governance corporate risk. Note the ongoing actions to manage this risk as detailed in paragraphs 2.5 and 2.9, and approve the next actions proposed as detailed in paragraphs 210 to 16. So are we happy to approve and to note for item 11? Thanks very much, everybody. Now, we've missed out item 12, having brought that forward. So we're on to item 13, which is page 217, which takes us back. This is the internal audit annual report 2021, and it's Ken once again.
Thanks, Kevin. I'll keep this relatively brief. Both the public sector internal audit standards and the internal audit charter require me to provide you, the Chief Executive and the corporate management team, with an annual summary of the work undertaken by audit, and to provide an annual opinion on the Council's corporate governance, risk management and internal control arrangements that I referred to earlier. So this report fulfils that requirement by providing an overview of the activities of the audit section during the 2021, and by highlighting just a number of the most significant issues that I require to update you on. Important to note that the annual opinion is unqualified, and the report offers a generally positive view of the Council's governance and internal control arrangements. So section 1 provides just a background primarily around the governance and where this report sits in the context of internal audit activities. Section 2 provides a very high-level overview of internal audit activity during 2021, and from an audit perspective, obviously 2021 was quite a year. Obviously, quite significant changes during the year to a lot of operating arrangements, a lot of governance arrangements, and a lot of internal control arrangements, and a lot of that happened at very rapid speed. And obviously, we've heard from a number of different speakers in a number of different ways, and the impact that kind of COVID and the policy response has had on the organisation. So this report sits very much in that context. So at section 2, I relate to, I reflect on how that's been reflected, both in terms of the impact on the internal audit section, where we had staff seconded for a significant part of the year to other roles. But obviously we, along with other senior colleagues, had to respond, to unprecedented challenges arising and often at quite short notice. And at paragraphs 211 and 212, I really just tried to give a very brief flavour of how that has impacted on internal audit and how we attempted to ensure that the audit perspective was at the heart of some of the kind of decision making that the council undertook. So you'll see there that we obviously worked closely with senior management to provide advice and commentary on proposals relating to new working arrangements across a range of different activities, and some key governance aspects as well. We've also specifically, and really just to provide added assurance to the panel, we've also undertaken some specific unplanned work in relation to some key areas where operational changes may have had the potential to impact on the efficacy of our control arrangements. So that included work on payroll, on creditors, and some of the COVID business support grant schemes. And generally, we've been able to report there fairly positively. So the appendix, at appendix 2, I provide a sort of detailed narrative of what work we did and when it was reported in relation to planned activity that was included in the plan that you approved back in August 20. You'll see there are some explanatory notes to explain we didn't do some assignments, and I think there were, hopefully you feel there were some valid reasons for that. And we've also, as I say, undertaken some unplanned work in relation to changes that arose from or since the plan was approved. So on balance, I'm pleased, and I think I commented before, I'm pleased to be able to say we did a sufficient volume of work across the board to be able to support the annual opinion that I'm required to give, and that annual opinion is at appendix 1. So I think, very, very positive, given the challenging circumstances that the council faced, both in terms of our kind of standard internal control framework, our overall governance arrangements, but also crucially some of the issues around financial management and financial sustainability that we've reported on were well managed. And I think our compliance with some of the kind of key corporate governance aspects, again, our work suggested that those continue to be positive and weren't in any way impaired by the events during the year. So overall, a fairly positive report, and obviously the annual opinions there to note. Happy to take any questions or comments.
Thanks, Ken. There's nobody on the chat bar. A very reassuring report, this one, Ken, so thanks for that. So there's no questions. So in item 13, the panel is asked to note the 2021 Internal Audit Annual Report and the associated annual opinion of the Audit and Risk Manager, and also to identify whether there are any issues arising on which the panel wishes to request further reports from internal audit or the relevant management. Are we okay with that? And we'll just we'll note item 13. Thanks very much. That takes us on to item 14. Now, Katrina's not here. I'm not sure if Elaine is going to do this one or it's Rob.
It's me, Councillor Watson.
All right, good, right. By the way.
So, Councillor 14 is the annual governance statement for the year
Right.
2021. This is a report that comes to the Audit and Scrutiny panel each year. It's the Council's annual governance statement to enable due consideration by elected members before it goes into the annual accounts and before it gets reported in the public domain. Section 1 of the report, which is on page 230 of your pack, provides you with the background as to why the annual governance statement is produced, the legislation that sits behind it, and also refers to the National Delivering Good Governance and Local Government Framework, which underpins the Council's arrangements. And Section 1 also gives you a brief overview of the process that is undertaken each year in order to inform the annual governance statement. If I take you to Section 2 of the report, which starts on page 231, paragraph 2.1 and all of the 10 sub-paragraphs underneath that provide you with the evidence that has been used to inform the annual governance statement. So that includes all of the heads of service signing off on a Chief Officer Certificate of Assurance following a comprehensive checklist process and confirming that there was no significant matters arising in their area of business which required to be covered in the annual governance statement. It included the Section 95 officer, the Head of Financial Solutions, providing the Chief Executive with a statement of the effectiveness of the Council's internal financial control systems. It included the Audit and Risk Manager's annual audit opinion, which you have just heard from Ken. It included the ALIOs all completing an annual assurance checklist as well, similar to the one the Heads of Service completed. And as noted in paragraph 1.9, it also included the self-evaluation exercise, which, as you've heard today, this year included the Council's response to COVID. And within that self-evaluation exercise, there was a specific section on the governance of the Council during COVID-19. And it also included a review and refresh of the Council's strategic governance framework, which members will remember approving in February 2020. So this looked at all of the controls and the mechanisms and the elements within the framework to identify if they were up to date, and if they weren't, they are now in a programme for review and update and further reporting to committee as required. So all in all, that evidence led to section 2.2. So the results of these processes were deemed to support the Chief Executive and the Council leader signing off the annual governance statement for 2021, which is included in Appendix 1, which starts on page 234 of your pack. I wasn't planning on going into the appendix in any detail. I'm happy to answer any questions. The report is here, as I said, to cover what's listed in paragraph 2.3 to allow members to view inclusion in the annual accounts and for consideration prior to paragraph 2.4 where it's reported publicly. So I'll hand back to you, Convener, if that's okay, for any questions and recommendations.
Yeah, thank you very much. That's very comprehensively covered. There's no questions on the chat bar. So agenda item 14, the annual governance statement. The panel is asked to note the contents of this report and consider and note the annual governance statements, which it requires to be included in the unaudited annual accounts for 2021. Are we happy to note? Thank you very much. Thank you. That takes us on to item 15. Elaine, you've sat through this on the way. So this is your big opportunity now. Thanks very much. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, convener. It's a very straightforward report, so I'll cover it quickly. So report confirms, Gillian alluded to it earlier, there have been significant additional challenges that have had an impact on preparing the financial statements. And in line, and it also says that in line with last year's approach, the draft accounts will be considered at the next planned meeting of the panel on the 2nd of September. However, the report does confirm that the accounts will be submitted to external audit by the statutory date of the 30th of June, which is today. And in fact, that happened this morning. The accounts were issued earlier and all members of the panel should now have received a copy of the unaudited audited accounts. So the reason that the accounts are not being considered at today's meeting is twofold. First of all, given the added complexities, I wanted to make sure that my officers had time to be satisfied that all the proper quality assurance checks that could be carried out were being carried out. And secondly, allowing that sufficient time for checks meant that the accounts would not have been issued to you as panel members, but to give you enough time to scrutinise them properly for discussion today. But what I want to make absolutely clear to the panel is the decision to bring the draft accounts to you on the 2nd of September does not in any way preclude full discussion on them. There'll be time for full discussion and questions on at the meeting on the 2nd of September, and then a further opportunity at the end of September when the fully audited accounts are presented to the panel. But I would say that I urge any panel member to contact me or a member of the team if you do have any questions in the meantime, given that you will have received a copy of the draft accounts this morning. That's all I wanted to say, convener. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Elaine. Thank you. Jim?
Thanks, Chair. I know, Elaine, that the accounts did indeed come out at 9 o'clock this morning, and to my eternal discredit, I've not read them yet. So that's me. I'm a bad guy for that. I note that last year, council were given dispensation to extend completing the accounts and submitting them beyond the 30th of June, but North Lanarkshire was one of the few councils that actually met the 30th of June. And I'm delighted to see you've met it again this year. And I just wanted to say super congratulations to you and the team for all the work you've done to deliver the accounts on time again. So through you, Chair, perhaps the committee would commend Elaine and the team for all their hard and excellent work.
Thanks, Jim. I think we would all totally agree with that. Well done, Elaine, and well done, the team. Are there any more questions on item 15? Right, well, that's the agenda covered for today. Thank you all very much. We had a very full agenda to get through. We've got to note this item 15, nearly missed that there. The panel's asked to note the contents of the report and note the draft accounts will be presented to the panel at the next planned meeting. Are we happy to note that? Thanks very much. And thanks again for coming. We'll see you all in due course. Appreciate the fact you were here. Thank you.